The jarring ring of my cell phone shattered the quiet calm of our living room. I glanced at the caller ID and felt a knot form in my stomach. Ely, my brother-in-law. Hello, I answered cautiously. Marla, don't play dumb with me, Eli's gruff voice barked through the speaker. When are you going to pay me back the 60 grand you borrowed? My eyes widened in disbelief. What are you talking about? I never borrowed any money from you. Don't insult me with your lies, he shouted. Nathan came to me 2 years ago begging for a loan because you two were drowning in debt. He promised he'd pay it all back once he got that big real estate deal. My heart pounded as confusion swirled in my mind. A $60,000 loan? Real estate deal? Why was this the first I was hearing about it? Ellie, I don't know what you're talking about, but Nathan and I are certainly not drowning in debt. There must be some misunderstanding. A bitter laugh crackled through the phone. Misunderstanding? You ungrateful. Don't you dare talk to my wife like that. Nathan's voice startled me as he snatched the phone from my hands. I watched his face contort in anger as he paced back and forth, growling harsh whispers I couldn't make out. The veins bulged from his neck as he argued fiercely with his brother. My mind raced to make sense of Eli's wild accusations. Had Nathan really taken out a massive loan without telling me? And what debt was he talking about? As far as I knew, we were doing fine financially, a little tight with the housing market dip, but nothing unmanageable. Right? Doubt crept in as I replayed the past few months. Nathan's suspiciously long work hours, the hushed phone conversations whenever I entered a room, our dwindling savings that he always blamed on expenses. I shuddered, feeling like I didn't recognize the man I loved anymore. Nathan abruptly ended the call, his face flushed red. He ran his fingers through his hair, letting out a frustrated exhale. What's going on, Nathan? I asked, unable to hide the slight tremble in my voice. Did you really take out a loan from Eli? He avoided eye contact, his jaw tightening. It's complicated, but you don't need to worry about it. The hell I don't, I snapped, surprising both of us with my outburst. Eli made it sound like we're drowning in debt, and you've been lying to me about money troubles. Nathan finally met my gaze, his eyes a swirling storm of conflict. Marla, you've got to trust me on this, okay? I'll handle it. I opened my mouth to protest, but he gently placed his finger on my lips, forcing a weak smile. Everything will be fine, I promise. He leaned in and kissed my forehead before grabbing his jacket and keys. Where are you going? Out. He muttered without explanation, heading for the front door. I watched helplessly as he left our home, slamming the door behind him. Doubts and suspicions swirled violently in the pit of my stomach. Who was this person I'd married, and why did I feel like I was surrounded by lies? I spent a restless night, staring at the ceiling, replaying Eli's biting words in my head. A $60,000 loan? How could Nathan have racked up that kind of debt without my knowledge? As the sun peeked through the curtains, I heard the front door creak open. Feigning sleep, I listened to Nathan's heavy footsteps and the muffled thud of his jacket hitting the floor. I rolled over, my eyes catching sight of the weary slump in his shoulders as he entered the bedroom. You're home late, I said flatly. Nathan flinched, clearly not expecting me to be awake. Yeah, had to work overtime on this new property listing. Lies. That's all I'd been hearing from him lately. My jaw clenched as I studied the dark circles under his bloodshot eyes. We need to talk about what Eli said. Marla, it's nothing, he grumbled, avoiding eye contact as he loosened his tie. My idiot brother has never been able to mind his own business. Then explain it to me. I shot back, anger bubbling up. Explain these mysterious debts and a $60,000 loan you apparently took from him behind my back. Nathan whirled around, his eyes flashing with rage. Because it's between me and him, all right? You weren't involved. We're married, Nathan, I shouted, jumping out of bed. When did you decide anything involving that kind of money wouldn't involve me? His face softened slightly as he opened his mouth to respond. But I wasn't finished. And that's not even the worst part, I seethed. The absolute worst is you lying to me this whole damn time. Nathan winced as my words struck a nerve. I haven't been lying. Oh, yeah? I stalked over to the dresser and yanked open the drawer, rifling through it until I found the bank statements. Then how about explaining these? I shoved the documents into his chest. pointing at the dwindling numbers that told a very different story than his "everything is fine" platitudes. "Our savings account is getting drained every month, and you keep telling me it's for bills or expenses for work." My voice cracked with a mix of anger and hurt. "What expenses, Nathan?" The truth, for once. He stared down at the statements, his jaw clenched tightly. The strangled silence between us was deafening. Finally, he spoke in a hoarse mutter. "I got in too deep. There's a big deal I've been working, but it required way more upfront cash than I had." He dragged a hand down his face warily. "I took the loan from Eli to cover it, telling him I'd pay him back once I landed this property." "And you couldn't tell me any of this because—" I folded my arms, raising my eyebrows expectantly. Nathan sighed heavily, plopping down on the edge of the bed. "You've been so focused on your career and wanting to start a family soon, I didn't want to disappoint you or add even more stress." My body went rigid as his words washed over me. More lies. Flimsy justifications for keeping me in the dark. Disappointment burned through me like acid. How had the devoted man I fell in love with become such a stranger? I fixed Nathan with a cold stare. "Get out!" His head snapped up, eyes widening in shock. "Marla, wait, please." "Get out of my house," I repeated slowly, my voice dripping with venom. "I can't even look at you right now." For a beat, Nathan looked like he might protest. But something in my expression must have convinced him otherwise. With slumped shoulders, he silently retrieved his jacket and walked out the door, leaving me alone with my swirling storm of rage and anguish. The deafening silence that filled our home after Nathan left was suffocating. Part of me wanted to believe his lies, to cling to the man I thought I knew. But the gut-wrenching truth hung heavy in the air. My husband had betrayed my trust in the worst way. I slouched on the couch, my head in my hands as I fought back tears. I couldn't keep living oblivious and naive while he squandered our future. It was time to take action. Grabbing my laptop, I logged into our bank accounts, my heart sinking with each new statement I pulled up. The numbers didn't lie. Huge sums were being siphoned out every month into some unknown void. Just then, my phone buzzed with a text notification from Eli. "We need to talk, face to face. I'll swing by this afternoon." I didn't bother responding, knowing this confrontation was inevitable. I spent the next few hours gathering any other evidence of Nathan's deception. Credit card statements, suspicious numbers frequently called from his phone, reports of unusual cash withdrawals from various ATMs. By the time Eli arrived, I was sitting amidst a storm of incriminating paperwork, my mind swirling with anger and disbelief. Eli barged in without knocking, his face set in stern determination. "Marla, He froze, taking in the documents scattered around me. "What is all this?" "Proof," I stated flatly, gesturing for him to sit down on the couch. "Proof that my husband has been lying to me about everything. Money has been disappearing from our accounts for months, maybe even years." As I launched into a detailed recounting of Nathan's excuses and evasions, Eli's expression morphed into seething rage. "That lying sack of shit," he growled, slamming his fist on the coffee table. "So he really took that loan from me under false pretenses?" What was his excuse? Why did he need $60,000 from you?" I demanded. Eli let out a bitter chuckle as he shook his head. "Get this. The moron claimed there was some urgent need for cash to keep your family's real estate business afloat. Spun this whole tale of hitting hard times and needing a bailout." My jaw dropped in disbelief. Our tiny, perpetually struggling real estate startup could barely afford the office rent, let alone require that kind of massive infusion of cash. "You're kidding me," I whispered, anger burning in my chest. I stood abruptly, snatching my keys off the counter. "That's it. I've had enough lying and deception." "Where are you going?" Eli asked as I stormed toward the door. "To get the truth, once and for all," I tossed over my shoulder. "And you're coming with me." Within minutes, we were speeding down the road, my knuckles white from gripping the steering wheel. We didn't exchange any words. Eli could see the tumult of emotion roiling across my face. Finally, we arrived at a dingy pool hall on the edge of town. I'd heard rumors of high-stakes poker games taking place in the back rooms, but never imagined Nathan being involved. I shoved open the doors and marched inside, scanning the dimly lit room with narrowed eyes until I spotted a familiar frame hunched over the billiards table. Nathan. "You lying piece of shit!" I screamed, causing every head to snap in our direction. Nathan whirled around, his eyes widening in shock and fear. In that moment, I saw the man he truly was, not the partner I devoted my life to, but a selfish coward willing to gamble away everything we'd built. I stormed toward him, Eli hot on my heels as the other patrons shrank back. "You've got some explaining to do, asshole," Eli growled, cracking his knuckles menacingly. "And you better not leave out a single goddamn detail." Nathan opened his mouth, but no words came out. He simply stared back at us, pale and trembling as the walls closed in. The look of sheer terror on Nathan's face should have given me some perverse satisfaction. But as I stood there, fists clenched and chest heaving, all I felt was a hollow ache of betrayal. "Well?" Eli barked, taking a threatening step forward. "You gonna explain yourself, little brother, or am I gonna have to beat it out of you?" Nathan's Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed hard. His gaze flickered around the hushed pool hall, seeming to realize there was no escape from this reckoning. I messed up, okay?" he stammered, holding up his hands defensively. "I got caught up in some bad business deals that put me in the hole financially." My eyes narrowed to slits. "So you lied and took $60,000 from your own brother to cover your ass, and then kept lying to me about all of it?" Something flashed in Nathan's eyes. Was it shame? Remorse? I couldn't tell, and quite frankly, I didn't care anymore. "The loan was just supposed to be temporary," he insisted, desperation creeping into his voice. "I was going to pay Eli back once this big property deal went through, but things spun out of control." "Out of control?" I scoffed derisively, shaking my head in disgust. "Our bank accounts were getting drained every month from gambling debts and whatever illegal crap you were pulling in these sleazy underground games." Nathan opened his mouth, but I silenced him with a raised hand. I'd heard enough lies to last a lifetime. Reaching into my purse, I pulled out the thick stack of documents I'd gathered, statements, histories, and photocopies cataloging Nathan's astounding web of deception. "This," I shoved the papers against his chest, my voice trembling with rage, "is everything I've uncovered about your disgusting betrayal, every filthy secret, every repulsive lie you told me." With a sinking feeling, Nathan thumbed through the evidence, his face paling as the magnitude of his misdeeds was laid bare. "Marla, I can explain." "Save it," I spat. "I'm done listening to your pathetic excuses." From the corner of my eye, I noticed the other pool hall patrons shifting uncomfortably, wanting no part of this messy confrontation. Good. I wanted them to see the lying, cheating scumbag I'd been married to. Eli stepped up beside me, cracking his knuckles ominously. "So what's it going to be, Nathan? You going to come clean about how big of a dirtbag you've been?" Panic flickered across Nathan's face as he looked between us helplessly. "Please, just give me one more chance. I can fix this, I swear." Something inside me snapped at his sniveling pleas. Winding my arm back, I let loose a slap that cracked across his cheek with a resounding smack. "You already had your chance, you selfish prick," I shouted, poking him hard in the chest. "Now it's time to pay up for every dollar and every lie." Hot tears stung my eyes as I glared at the man I once loved, the person I naively hitched my entire future to. Eli was right. He was a lying sack of shit, not even worthy of being called family. Nathan cradled his reddened cheek, his eyes filled with a childlike fear. The air was thick with tension as we reached an impasse, the ultimatum hanging perilously. "Well," Eli growled, flexing his thick arms menacingly, "you gonna start talking and make things right, or do we got a problem here?" My heart pounded against my ribs as Nathan's gaze met mine, silently pleading for some shred of mercy or understanding, but there was nothing left to salvage. He was on his own now. Over the next few days, I operated in an enraged haze, making preparation after preparation for the inevitable confrontation. I invited a few of our closest mutual friends over under the pretense of a peacemaking dinner between Nathan and Eli. Little did Nathan know it was the setup for his grand unveiling as a liar and a cheat. When he arrived that evening, looking sheepish and apprehensive, I greeted him with hollow politeness. The others chatted and made small talk over drinks in the living room, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing. As dinner commenced, the atmosphere thickened with tension. I noticed beads of sweat forming on Nathan's brow as he kept shooting nervous glances between Eli and me. "So," our friend Mark spoke up after an uncomfortable lull, What's really going on here? We all know you two have beef. I exchanged a loaded look with Eli, who gave an almost imperceptible nod. Showtime. Clearing my throat, I fixed Nathan with an icy glare. You want to know what's going on? How about we start with Nathan taking out a secret $60,000 loan from Eli? The table fell into stunned silence, all eyes swiveling to Nathan in shock. His face drained of color as he gripped his fork tightly. She's lying, he croaked out, shaking his head vehemently. I never took any loan. In one deft motion, Eli reached into his jacket and slammed a thick manila envelope onto the table. It landed with a heavy thud, scattering utensils. Really, bro? His tone dripped with disdain. Because I've got bank statements, text messages, and a whole damn paper trail showing otherwise. With trembling hands, Eli extracted the stack of documents, letting them flutter out as undeniable proof. My chest tightened as I watched the realization wash over our friends' faces. The confusion, the disbelief, the dawning horror at the depths of Nathan's betrayal. No. Angela, my closest friend, whispered as she stared at the paperwork. How could you, Nathan? Your own family. His expression contorted with panic as he scanned the incriminating evidence surrounding him, the cornered prey with nowhere left to run. It's not what it looks like, I swear, he pleaded, looking around the table desperately. I was going to pay him back. I got in over my head with this real estate deal. Cut the shit, Nathan! Eli roared, slamming his fist on the table and making everyone jump. We all know you've been blowing cash on underground gambling and God knows what else. My heart twisted as hurt flickered across Nathan's face. You told them? I told them the truth, I spat, anger reigniting. The truth about how you've been lying, stealing, and gambling away our future to fund your pathetic addiction. Something dark flickered in Nathan's eyes as his expression hardened. You're one to talk about addiction, Marla. Ever consider you're just a nagging, controlling bitch who can't handle? The crack of my palm across his cheek reverberated through the deathly silent room. A collective gasp rippled from our friends as Nathan cradled his reddened face, pure venom in his glare. Don't you dare talk to my wife like that, you piece of garbage! Eli snarled, rising to his feet menacingly. The tangy metallic scent of blood filled the air. Whether Nathan's lip was split or from my stinging hand, I couldn't tell. All I knew was my body thrumming with adrenaline and fury as the avalanche finally crashed down. Get out, I hissed through gritted teeth, unable to even look at Nathan anymore. Take your shit and get out of my house. For a long, tense moment, Nathan seemed to contemplate digging in, arguing, fighting against the tide. But faced with Eli's imposing figure and our friends' disgusted stares, he had no choice but to slink away in disgrace. One by one, my friends filed out in silence, leaving just Eli and me amid the debris of shattered illusions. As I sank numbly onto the couch, the gravity of what had occurred washed over me in waves. Every duplicitous act, every egregious lie had been laid bare, and yet, rather than the catharsis or relief I expected, all I felt was a bone-deep weariness. Eli squeezed my shoulder gently as I stared off into the distance, unsure what lay ahead. But at least now, the truth was inescapable. The hours and days following that disastrous dinner blurred together in a muddled haze. Nathan made feeble attempts to reconcile, leaving pathetic voicemails and texts that I instantly deleted without listening. I was done being manipulated by his lies. My friends rallied around me, offering steadfast support and shoulders to cry on when the anguish became too much. Angela, in particular, was a rock, spending long nights on my couch as I raged, sobbed, and spilled out the depths of Nathan's deception. I can't believe I was so blind, I whispered hoarsely one evening, clutching a glass of wine like a lifeline. How could I have not seen what a despicable person he really was? Angela squeezed my hand, her eyes glistening with compassion. That's what con artists do, Marla. They become experts at hiding their true nature from even those closest to them. I winced at the harsh truth in her words. Con artist? It left a sour taste just thinking about Nathan that way. As the initial shock wore off, red-hot fury consumed me. The pieces were finally falling into place. His constant business trips and odd hours, the drained bank accounts and mounting debts, his panicked desperation when I uncovered the loan from Eli. It was all to cover up his spiraling gambling addiction and illicit activities. When the anger became too overwhelming to contain, Eli was my release valve. We would meet for drinks or hash it out over the phone, raging about what a pathetic, sniveling coward Nathan had become. He's going to face consequences. Eli growled one night, slamming his fist on the bar with emphasis. I don't care if I have to take his ass to court and garnish every paycheck. He's going to pay back every last cent with interest. My own demands went even further than just financial restitution. I wanted reparations for the emotional and psychological torture Nathan had put me through. Unbidden images would flash through my mind. Nathan sneaking out at odd hours, him huddled over a smoky poker table surrounded by seedy thugs, blowing our hard-earned money in reckless bets. The enormity of his selfish betrayal made me feel physically ill. I began compiling a case to present to my lawyer, documentation of secretive bank transfers and cash withdrawals, incriminating text messages with his gambling buddies, proof that his ludicrous business expenses were actually losses covered up. With each new discovery, my rage toward Nathan calcified like hardening cement. This was so far beyond simple indiscretions or mistakes. This was a systematic, premeditated campaign of fraud and deception against me, his wife, his supposed loved one. I wanted to ensure Nathan's lies finally caught up with him in the most publicly humiliating way possible. My ambushes continued in front of friends, family, anyone who would witness his hollow, groveling attempts to win me back. I'd calmly present the latest piece of damning evidence, watching his face go bloodless with panic. Is this the kind of man you want to be defended? I asked coolly during one such confrontation at Eli's house, holding up bank statements with thousands embezzled. A common criminal who stole from his own family? Nathan opened and closed his mouth like a gasping fish, sweat beading on his brow as our gathered loved ones stared at him in revulsion. I made mistakes, but I can change, he stammered desperately. We can rebuild the trust, just give me one more chance. His words trailed off as I fixed him with a look of pure, unbridled disgust. You've had more than enough chances, Nathan. Now it's time to face the consequences of your sickening choices. With trembling hands, Eli produced a bound stack of papers, a comprehensive record of every cent Nathan owed, all the debts and losses totaled into a staggering lump sum. This is your path to making amends, Eli stated, his voice dripping with disdain as he shoved the documents into Nathan's chest. Either you square up and start paying, or I take you to court and legally garnish every dime to your name. An oppressive silence hung in the air, punctuated only by Nathan's shuddering breaths. His eyes darted between Eli, me, and the paperwork, the weight of the ultimatum visibly crushing him. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he met my gaze with those same wounded puppy dog eyes that had melted me 1,000 times before, but not this time. Please, he croaked out, a broken, pitiful whisper. I crossed my arms, shaking my head slowly as an adamant chill froze over my expression. You had your chance, I said flatly. It's over. And with that, the last withered vines of love and trust I'd clung to for far too long finally unraveled, leaving only the cold, hard truth. Nathan was nothing but a selfish, pathetic liar who deserved to reap the most agonizing consequences for shredding me to pieces. With Eli's steadfast support, I launched a full-scale legal assault against Nathan. No more hollow threats or impassioned rants. It was time to hit him where it hurt most. His wallet. I filed for divorce first, seeking not only a dissolution of our sham marriage, but also compensation for the incredible emotional and financial trauma he'd inflicted. My lawyer was a ruthless barracuda who smelled blood in the water. With the mountain of evidence you've provided, we have a very strong case against your husband for fraud, embezzlement, and gross financial malfeasance, she stated matter-of-factly as we strategized our attack. Before Nathan could so much as blink, the divorce papers were delivered along with the monetary demands, every cent of Eli's original loan, plus additional punitive damages for pain and suffering. Needless to say, Nathan didn't take it well. Are you out of your goddamn mind? He shouted at me during one heated exchange, spittle flying. You're trying to financially cripple me for the rest of my life. I crossed my arms, unmoved by his sputtering outrage. I'm simply pursuing appropriate legal reparations for your egregious betrayals, Nathan. I think I'm more than entitled after you stole from me and destroyed our marriage with your lies. His face mottled red with impotent rage as my words struck a nerve. You self-righteous bitch, like you're so innocent in all this. I'd watch it if I were you, Eli stepped in, shoving his bony finger into Nathan's chest. Keep running that mouth and see how much worse the financial penalties get. Nathan looked ready to swing at his older brother, hands balled into tight fists. But then his shoulders slumped in resignation, maybe finally realizing the futility of his situation. While the divorce proceedings trudged along, Eli and I kept piling on the pressure from every angle. We acquired copies of Nathan's employment file from his real estate broker and gleefully sent the damning documentation to his bosses, records of unexcused absences, documented lies about his whereabouts, even a formal complaint from a client about Nathan's erratic, unprofessional behavior. Within days, the inevitable phone call came. Nathan had been terminated from his job and banned from the premises. One more ruinous consequence for his reckless actions. How's it feel to have your entire life crumbling around you? I asked in a sickly sweet tone after delivering the news in person. Not so fun being on the receiving end of deception, is it? Nathan's face was pallid, his eyes sunken as he stared at me with a potent mix of fear and loathing. You're a sadistic monster, you know that? I shrugged nonchalantly, inspecting my nails. Maybe so, but at least I'm not a pathetic, sniveling liar who torched my own marriage for some cheap gambling thrills. Watching him flinch at my biting words, I felt a twisted sense of wicked satisfaction. For far too long he had gaslit me, controlled the narrative with his manipulations. But now, finally, the all-powerful facade had crumbled away, leaving him weak and powerless. The roles were starkly reversed. Over the ensuing weeks, Nathan couldn't even muster a whimper of protest as heavy garnishments were applied to what little assets and income remained in his name. Insurmountable legal fees mounted as he frantically tried to halt the avalanche, only to be continuously rebuffed. We made sure to extract our proverbial pound of flesh plus interest, calling in every chit and using every underhanded tactic his own duplicity had exposed. Eliciting any mercy would have been useless. We had definitively beaten him into submission, the dying dog too hobbled to bite back. In the end, after liquidating what remained of his rapidly dwindling net worth, we recouped the entirety of Eli's loan amount, plus triple in punitive damages for me. It still wasn't enough to make me feel whole again, but watching Nathan have to grovel and pay his dues was as close to justice as I could realistically hope. As I finally signed the divorce papers, officially severing our toxic union forever, I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. The worst was over. I had unmasked Nathan's true nature, dragged his sickening con into the harsh light, and ensured he suffered appropriately. While neither of us escaped unscathed, at least I could hold my head high. Nathan was just another disgraced, debt-ridden liar left to rot in the ashes of his own deception. The final decree from the judge sliced through me like a white-hot blade. My marriage was officially over. As I left the stark, sterile confines of the courthouse that day, I couldn't help but feel a strange cocktail of relief and emptiness. Relief that the brutal, dragged-out ordeal with Nathan had finally concluded, but emptiness over the death of the idealistic dreams I had carefully nurtured for so many years. The life I had envisioned, building a home, having children, growing old together, shattered into a million mocking pieces by one man's reprehensible greed and deceit. I gripped the thick sheaf of papers detailing the final divorce judgments, the division of assets heavily in my favor, the monumental punitive damages Nathan was on the hook for, even a strict garnishment of his future earnings to ensure compliance. Tangible evidence of how thoroughly I had dismantled him, the justly earned spoils after our harrowing war. And yet it felt so empty. Hollow, like I was a victor standing amongst the rubble and ruin. You okay? I glanced up to see Eli studying me with a concerned frown, his brow furrowed. In the aftermath of the prolonged legal battles, he had become an invaluable ally, a tenacious partner willing to go to the trenches to hold Nathan accountable. Yeah, I'm fine, I replied automatically, plastering on an unconvincing smile. Just processing everything, you know? Eli nodded solemnly, seeming to recognize my morose mood. We said little as we made our way to the parking lot, the weighty silence between us laden with unspoken words. As I climbed into my car, getting ready to depart our separate ways, Eli rapped his knuckles on the window. When I rolled it down, his expression was somber, yet resolute. You did the right thing, Marla, he stated, leaning down to meet my gaze. I know it doesn't feel like it now, with all the pain and bullshit, but you showed that scumbag the consequences of betraying his family. You held him accountable when no one else could. My throat tightened with emotion as I processed his words, giving a small nod of acknowledgement. Eli squeezed my shoulder bracingly. It'll get easier from here. You've got your whole life ahead to focus on healing and moving forward. I'm sorry it had to happen this way. With that, he stepped back, offering me one final look of solidarity before turning and walking towards his own vehicle. I watched him go, feeling paradoxically lighter yet more adrift than I had in years. The weeks and months that followed were a harsh sojourn into uncharted territory, rebuilding my life from the ashes, one sobering step at a time. I threw myself headlong into my work, determined to re-establish the parts of my identity that Nathan had slowly leached away through years of gaslighting and control. Little by little, with the help of my support system, I regained my footing and composure. The burden of deceit lifted from my shoulders as I finally allowed myself to breathe freely. Inevitably, updates about Nathan's downward spiral trickled back to me. How he was ensnared in another high-stakes gambling scheme, racking up further debts he had no prayer of repaying. How he was kicked out of his rented apartment and sofa surfing from one friend's place to another. Bitter rants about the psycho bitch ex-wife who ruined his life. Part of me felt a vicious sense of vindication upon hearing those sordid tales. Let the sadistic liar reap the fruits of his actions, sleeping in the bed of consequences he had so meticulously made. But for the most part, I simply felt indifferent. A chapter had closed, cauterized after being ruthlessly extricated from my life like a cancerous growth. In the end, the ultimate revenge was simply moving forward, thriving and finding fulfillment in a life cleansed of Nathan's toxic influence. While he spiraled into the ashen abyss of his own making, I steadily rebuilt piece by piece, year over year. A small smile played across my lips as I signed the mortgage papers for my very own home, a peaceful sanctuary uncompromised by any taint of the past. My sanctuary, the home I would raise a family in one day when the time was right. I was free. The long con had finally concluded, and I had emerged battered yet triumphant, wiser to the ways the sadistic deceivers employ to ensnare their prey. Some day down the line, I thought with grim satisfaction, Nathan would understand the most valuable lesson of all, that betrayal and deception bear a toll that no amount of lies can ever repay, no matter how long the con lasts.
The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as I sat in what was literally a converted storage room at Armstrong Investment Group. Boxes of old files lined the walls, and the desk they'd provided was actually a fold-out table. My brother David's idea of where to put his sister during the annual investment meeting. Sorry about the accommodations, his assistant had said with fake sympathy, but all the real offices are needed for important attendees. Important attendees. Right. Because being the founder of Phoenix Capital with its $2.8 billion in assets under management wasn't important enough for a proper office. Of course, they didn't know about Phoenix Capital. To them, I was just Sarah Armstrong, David's little sister who dabbled in investments while he climbed the corporate ladder at our father's firm. They had no idea that for the past 5 years, I'd been systematically buying shares in Armstrong Investment Group through a series of shell companies. My phone buzzed. A message from my CFO. Final share purchase complete. We now own 51% of AIG. Board meeting in 1 hour. I smiled, straightening my deliberately understated blazer. David had always said I dressed too casually for finance. Image is everything in this business, he'd lectured countless times. Today he'd learned just how wrong he was about everything. Another message popped up. David this time. Hope the storage room's comfortable, sis. Don't worry, we'll wrap up the real meetings soon and then you can go back to your little investment club. Investment club. That's what he'd called Phoenix Capital when I tried to discuss potential collaboration last year. Cute that you're running an investment club, he'd said at the family dinner, but leave the real finance to the professionals. The professionals who had no idea their company had just been acquired by that investment club. I checked my watch, 45 minutes until the board meeting where CEO Richard Maxwell would announce the company's new majority shareholder. David as head of acquisitions would be there. So would our father, chairman of the board, who'd always treated my financial career as a phase I'd grow out of eventually. My phone rang. It was Marcus, my head of legal. Everything's in place, Sarah. The paperwork's ironclad. Want me to send security up to get you out of that storage room? No, I replied, looking around at the dusty boxes. Let them have their little power play. It'll make the next hour so much more interesting. A commotion outside drew my attention. Through the storage room's small window, I could see David leading a group of executives past, proudly showing off the firm's recent acquisitions. He didn't even glance at the storage room door. And this quarter, his voice carried through the thin walls, we're targeting smaller investment firms for acquisition. Easy pickings, really. These little boutique operations don't know what hit them until it's too late. The executives laughed. If they only knew that one of those little boutique operations had just swallowed their company whole. My tablet chimed with an email from Richard Maxwell. Meeting in 15 minutes. The announcement will proceed as planned. They have no idea. Richard had been surprisingly easy to work with once he'd discovered who was behind the share acquisitions. Unlike my family, he'd done his homework on Phoenix Capital. He knew exactly what I'd built while they were dismissing me. Another text from David. Board meeting starting soon. Don't wait around. This is way above your pay grade, sis. Dinner at Mom and Dad's on Sunday? You can tell us all about your little investment club. I stood up, gathering my things. The storage room had served its purpose. It was the perfect metaphor for how they'd always treated my ambitions. But in 15 minutes, everything would change. My phone buzzed one last time. Mom, darling, David says you're at the office. How nice that they let you sit in on some meetings. Maybe you'll learn something from the professionals. Learn something. Oh, they had no idea what lessons were about to be taught. I straightened my casual blazer, checked my deliberately understated appearance in my phone's reflection, and headed toward the boardroom. Time to show them what a little investment club could do. The Armstrong Investment Group boardroom was a testament to old money and older egos. 25 leather chairs surrounded a mahogany table that probably cost more than most people's cars. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered panoramic views of Manhattan, while oil paintings of past chairmen, including my father, watched over their domain with painted pomposity. I slipped into the room quietly, taking a seat in the back corner. David, holding court at the center of the table, didn't even notice my entrance. He was too busy explaining his latest acquisition strategy to a group of admiring junior executives. The key is to target vulnerable firms, he was saying, straightening his Hermes tie. Small operations that don't understand real market dynamics. Like those boutique investment shops that think they can compete with established institutions. Our father entered then, his presence commanding immediate attention. At 65, Jonathan Armstrong still ruled Armstrong Investment Group with an iron fist and an unshakable belief in his own infallibility. David. He nodded approvingly at my brother before taking his seat at the head of the table. His eyes passed over me without recognition. I was just another face in the crowd, not worth the chairman's attention. My phone buzzed silently, a message from my team. Transfer complete. All voting rights secured. Phoenix Capital now controls 51.3% of AIG shares. I smiled, thinking of the storage room they'd banished me to. In about 10 minutes, that room would probably become the most infamous space in corporate history. The place where they'd stash their new boss. CEO Richard Maxwell entered last, carrying a thick folder with the Phoenix Capital logo partially visible. David, ever the brown-noser, immediately launched into his presentation. Before we begin, I'd like to discuss our acquisition targets for the next quarter. I've identified several promising small firms that... Actually, Richard interrupted, his voice carrying an edge David didn't notice. We have a more pressing matter to discuss. A change in ownership structure. The room went silent. My father leaned forward, frowning. Change in ownership? I wasn't aware of any significant share movements. That's because they were executed through multiple shell companies, Richard explained, opening his folder. Over the past 5 years, Phoenix Capital has been systematically acquiring Armstrong Investment Group shares through various subsidiaries. David laughed dismissively. Phoenix Capital? Never heard of them. Probably another one of those amateur operations. Amateur. Richard raised an eyebrow. They manage $2.8 billion in assets. And as of this morning, they own 51.3% of Armstrong Investment Group. The room erupted in chaos. My father's face turned an interesting shade of red as he snatched the documents from Richard's hands. David jumped up, his perfect tie suddenly askew. "This is impossible," he shouted. "Who are these people? How dare they? How dare we what?" I stood up, stepping forward from my corner. "Make a strategic acquisition? Isn't that what you were just bragging about, David? Targeting vulnerable firms that don't see you coming." The look on his face was worth every condescending comment he'd ever made about my little investment club. "Sarah," our father's voice cracked. "What are you doing here? This is a private board meeting about Phoenix Capital's acquisition of Armstrong Investment Group," I finished, walking to the front of the room. "My company's acquisition, to be precise." David's mouth opened and closed like a designer-clad fish out of water. "You're what?" "Phoenix Capital," I smiled, taking the folder from our father's limp hands. "The investment firm you called a cute little club last Thanksgiving. The one Mom said was my hobby while you were doing real finance. That one." Richard stood up, addressing the stunned room. "Ladies and gentlemen, meet Sarah Armstrong, founder and CEO of Phoenix Capital, and as of this morning, the majority shareholder of Armstrong Investment Group." The silence in the boardroom was delicious. Like aged wine, best savored slowly. I remained standing at the front, watching the kaleidoscope of emotions play across my family's faces. David had loosened his perfect tie, his usual smugness replaced by something approaching panic. Our father gripped the arms of his chairman's seat as if it might disappear beneath him, which technically it was about to. "This is absurd," David finally sputtered. "Sarah runs an investment club, not a company that just acquired your employer?" I pulled up Phoenix Capital's portfolio on the room's display screen. "Let's review some numbers, shall we? Since you're all about real finance." The figures that filled the screen told a story they couldn't dismiss. 5 years of strategic acquisitions. $3 billion in assets under management. A return rate that made Armstrong Investment Group's numbers look amateur. "While you were putting me in storage rooms," I continued, clicking through slides, "Phoenix Capital was acquiring positions in every major market sector. While you were mocking my casual approach to business, we were outperforming your professional returns by 300%. My phone buzzed, a message from Mom. "Darling, why is your father calling me from the board meeting? What's happening?" I showed the message to the room. "Shall I tell her? Or would you like to explain how your hobby daughter just became your boss?" "You can't do this," our father finally found his voice. "The board won't accept." "The board doesn't have a choice," Richard interjected, distributing documents. "The share acquisition is complete and legal. Sarah controls the majority voting rights." David lunged for the papers, his Harvard law degree finally kicking in as he searched for loopholes. "There must be some regulation, some rule about family acquisitions. Like the rules you used to acquire Stevens & Co. last year?" I raised an eyebrow. "The hostile takeover you bragged about at Christmas dinner while explaining why my little investment club would never understand real corporate strategy." The color drained from his face. He remembered, finally, exactly what he'd revealed during that boastful monologue. "You." He looked up from the papers. "You used my own acquisition strategy against us." "No, David. I improved it. Your approach was good but a bit obvious. Phoenix Capital developed a more sophisticated method. We should discuss it sometime, maybe in the storage room." The junior executives were trying desperately to hide their smirks. They'd all suffered under David's arrogance, watched him take credit for their work while dismissing anyone he deemed beneath him. My father stood up, straightening his shoulders. "Sarah, be reasonable. This is a family company. We can work something out." "Family company?" I laughed. "Funny how it was only about family when you were excluding me. How many times did you tell me to leave the real business to David? How many of my investment proposals did you dismiss without reading?" I clicked to the next slide, a compilation of emails spanning years. Emails where they dismissed my ideas, mocked my strategies, relegated me to the margins of the family business. "But here's the beautiful part," I continued. "Every time you dismissed me, I bought more shares. Every condescending comment funded another acquisition. You literally paid for your own takeover with your arrogance. My phone buzzed again. My CFO this time. Markets reacting to the news. Armstrong stock up 12% on announcement of Phoenix acquisition. I showed the update to the room. Look at that. The market seems to think your hobby daughter knows what she's doing. David slumped in his chair, his perfect posture finally breaking. What are you going to do? Fire everyone. Fire everyone? Oh no, David. I'm going to do something much worse. I smiled, taking the chairman's seat our father had vacated. I'm going to make you earn your position. No more nepotism, no more corner offices based on last names. Starting tomorrow, everyone in this company will be evaluated on merit alone. The room broke into spontaneous applause, quickly stifled when David glared around. But the message was clear. The era of Armstrong privilege was over. And David, I added sweetly, clean out your office. I think you'll find the storage room quite adequate for your new position as junior analyst. After all, it was good enough for your boss this morning. Our father sank back into his chair, looking decades older. All these years, while we thought you were playing at business, I was building something real, I finished. Something bigger than your outdated boys' club could imagine. And now, I gestured to the room, to the company that was now mine. Now you work for your hobby daughter. The next hour was a symphony of corporate restructuring. New board appointments, department reorganizations, and most satisfyingly, watching David pack up his corner office while maintenance workers changed the name on the door. Sarah Armstrong, CEO and chairwoman. My phone kept buzzing with family messages. Mom, darling, please tell me this is a mistake. Aunt Patricia, your father is devastated. How could you do this to family? David, we can fight this. I have contacts. I ignored them all, focusing instead on the email from the Wall Street Journal requesting an interview. From storage room to boardroom, the silent takeover that shocked Wall Street. Perfect headline. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't just succeeding, it's succeeding so spectacularly that those who dismissed you have to call you boss. The sun was setting over Manhattan when I finally left the office, casting long shadows through the boardroom windows. The oil paintings of past chairmen seemed less imposing now, their stern faces powerless against the changes I was bringing. Tomorrow the real work would begin. Merit-based promotions. Equal opportunities regardless of gender or family connections. A complete overhaul of the old boys network that had kept talents like mine in storage rooms. But tonight I would savor the victory of the hobby daughter who became an empire builder. Because sometimes the best investment strategy isn't buying stocks or bonds. It's investing in the satisfaction of proving everyone wrong. And as for that storage room, I had plans for it. It would become the company's new innovation center, where good ideas would be heard regardless of who proposed them. After all, you never know which storage room might be hiding your next boss. 1 year later, I stood at the podium during Armstrong Investment Group's annual shareholder meeting, now rebranded as Phoenix Armstrong Global. The company's value had doubled, our client base had tripled, and the Wall Street Journal had just named me Financial CEO of the Year. In the audience, David sat in the middle rows. He'd actually proven competent once he had to work for his position. Our father had retired, though he still called weekly to offer advice, that I politely declined. Mom had finally stopped asking when I would settle down and let the men handle business. Success in modern finance isn't about who you know or what family you're from, I concluded my speech. It's about innovation, merit, and recognizing talent wherever it appears, even in storage rooms. The laughter from the audience was genuine, the story of the storage room takeover, having become Wall Street legend. After the meeting, I found David waiting by my office. The same office he'd once claimed I'd never understand enough to occupy. You know, he said quietly, that storage room was the biggest mistake of my life. No, I corrected him, underestimating your sister was the biggest mistake of your life. The storage room just gave me a quiet place to finalize the takeover. Because sometimes the best lessons in business don't come from Harvard Business School or family connections. They come from being underestimated by the very people who should have known better. And that storage room? It's now the most requested office in the building. After all, everyone wants to work where the revolution began. I stood in the doorway of my aunt's sprawling mansion, watching the annual Miller family business dinner unfold in the formal dining room. Crystal glasses clinked, designer suits gleamed, and success stories were traded like currency. The same scene that had played out every year since I was a child, except this time, everything was about to change. "Oh, Alexandra, you made it," Aunt Catherine's voice dripped with false warmth. "We're a bit crowded in here with the important guests. Why don't you sit in the kitchen? You'll be more comfortable there." I glanced at the perfectly set dining table where my cousins Michael and Elizabeth sat with their respective spouses, all proudly wearing their Miller Enterprises executive badges. The important guests were potential investors they'd been courting for months, unaware that those same investors had already signed deals with my company. "Of course, Aunt Catherine," I said quietly, smoothing down my simple black dress, a custom Valentino that they'd assume was from a department store. "I wouldn't want to disturb the business discussion." "That's the spirit," my Uncle James, CEO of Miller Enterprises, called out. "Leave the real business to those who understand it." If he only knew that I understood it better than all of them combined. That while they thought I was running a small consulting firm, I'd built Aurora Industries into one of the most powerful private equity companies in the country. That their precious family business was already in my crosshairs. "Still doing that little consulting thing?" Elizabeth asked, her diamond bracelet catching the light as she gestured dismissively. "You know, we're always hiring entry-level positions at Miller Enterprises. Even you might qualify for those." I thought about the documents sitting on my desk at Aurora's headquarters. The ones that would show Elizabeth exactly what little consulting thing meant. "I'm doing fine," I replied, taking my assigned seat in the kitchen, next to the staff preparing dinner. They at least had the decency to look embarrassed on my behalf. Michael's voice carried from the dining room. "Did you hear about our latest acquisition? $300 million deal." But of course Alexandra wouldn't understand numbers that big. I suppressed a smile thinking about the billion-dollar deals I closed last month alone. About how Aurora Industries had systematically been buying up Miller Enterprises suppliers, partners and competitors. About how this dinner would be their last celebration before everything changed. My phone buzzed, my CFO's name flashed on the screen. She knew not to call during family events unless it was urgent. "Excuse me," I said to no one in particular, though I could see Aunt Catherine frowning at my rudeness. "Ms. Miller," Sarah's voice was clear and professional. "The final paperwork for the Miller Enterprises acquisition is ready. Their board has secretly approved the sale. Should we proceed with the announcement tomorrow?" I stood up, deliberately moving closer to the dining room door. "Put it on speaker, Sarah. I want to make sure I hear all the details clearly." The conversation in the dining room quieted as Sarah's voice filled the kitchen. "The purchase price is set at $2.4 billion, significantly over market value given their recent losses. But as you predicted, their desperation to sell before the scandal breaks made them eager to accept." I watched color drain from Uncle James's face as he recognized the details of the confidential deal he'd thought was safely hidden. "And the voting shares?" I asked, loud enough to carry. "Secured. Between the shares we've quietly acquired and the proxy agreements we've obtained, we control 63% of Miller Enterprises. The family will retain only minority interest with no operational control." Elizabeth's wine glass slipped from her hand, shattering on the expensive tablecloth. Michael stood up so quickly his chair toppled backward. "What's going on?" one of the investors asked, looking between me and my shell-shocked family. I walked calmly into the dining room, phone still on speaker. "Just finalizing some business, Mr. Davidson. Though I believe you already know about this deal, since your firm signed support agreements with Aurora last week." "Aurora?" Uncle James whispered. "You're working with Aurora Industries?" "Not exactly," I smiled, finally letting the facade drop. "I am Aurora Industries, founder, CEO, and as of tomorrow morning the new owner of Miller Enterprises." The silence that followed was deafening. Years of dismissal, of relegation to the kitchen, of being treated as less than them, all of it was about to be repaid with interest. My phone buzzed again. The timing couldn't have been more perfect for what was coming next. "What did you just say?" Uncle James's voice shook as he stood up, his face turning an alarming shade of red. "Perhaps we should continue this discussion in private," I suggested, glancing meaningfully at the investors who were watching the scene unfold with increasing interest. Like how we will, Michael snarled, but Aunt Catherine grabbed his arm. Of course, she said through clenched teeth. The study. Now. As my family filed out, I turned to the investors. Gentlemen, I apologize for the dramatics. I trust our previous agreements still stand. Mr. Davidson nodded, a slight smile playing at his lips. Wouldn't miss this show for the world, Ms. Miller. Or should I say Ms. Aurora? In Uncle James's wood-paneled study, the explosion I'd been waiting for finally came. You manipulative little snake, Elizabeth hissed. How dare you embarrass us like this? Embarrass you? I perched on the edge of his massive desk, the same desk where he'd once told me I wasn't Miller material. Like you embarrassed me for years? Making me eat in kitchens, excluding me from meetings, treating me like some charity case. We were protecting you, Aunt Catherine insisted. You weren't ready for the business world. I pulled out my phone, pulling up Aurora's latest financial reports. Current market cap, $12.8 billion. Annual revenue, $3.2 billion. Net profit margin, 28%. Tell me again how I wasn't ready. Michael grabbed the phone, his hands shaking as he scrolled through the numbers. This is impossible. You're nothing but a small-time consultant. That was my cover, I smiled. While you were all busy looking down on me, I was building something bigger than Miller Enterprises could ever be. No. I own you. You can't do this, Uncle James finally spoke, his voice hoarse. The board would never approve. The board already has. I pulled out a stack of documents from my bag. Remember that emergency meeting last week? The one you called to discuss the mysterious buyer who'd been acquiring shares? That was me. Through various shell companies, Aurora already controls the majority. Aunt Catherine sank into a leather chair, her perfect posture finally breaking. But where did you get the money? Remember that app one developed in college? The one you all laughed at. I watched comprehension dawn on their faces. Sold it for $50 million. Invested every penny. Built Aurora from the ground up while you were all too busy mocking my little consulting business to notice. Elizabeth started pacing, her designer heels clicking against the hardwood. This is about revenge, isn't it? Making us pay for not handing you everything on a silver platter. No, Elizabeth. This is about business. Miller Enterprises is undervalued, poorly managed, and ripe for acquisition. The fact that it belongs to my loving family? That's just a bonus. My phone buzzed again. Sarah was sending through the final contracts. Oh, and there's one more thing you should know. The merger announcement goes public at 9 a.m. tomorrow. But the press release isn't just about the acquisition. What do you mean? Michael demanded. I pulled up the draft on my phone. Miller Enterprises has been covering up some interesting financial irregularities. The kind that might interest the unless. Unless what? Uncle James whispered, though he already knew. Unless you all resign. Tonight. No golden parachutes, no consulting positions, no board seats. You walk away with your shares converted to Aurora stock, minority interests only, of course. And I don't release the evidence of your creative accounting. Aunt Catherine stood up, straightening her designer suit. You wouldn't dare. We're family. Family. I laughed. Was I family when you made me eat in the kitchen? When you told potential clients I was the cleaning staff? When you denied me the vice presidency I'd earned because it would confuse people to have me in leadership? I stood up, smoothing my dress. You have 1 hour to decide. Sign the resignation letters my lawyers are drafting, or I release everything. And trust me, prison jumpsuits aren't nearly as flattering as your Chanel. You'll destroy the Miller name, Uncle James protested. No, Uncle James. You did that yourselves. I'm just buying the remains. As I walked to the door, Elizabeth called out, Where are you going? I turned back, savoring the moment. To the dining room. I believe there's an empty seat at the head of the table now. The headlines the next morning were exactly as I'd orchestrated. Miller Enterprises acquired in surprise takeover by Aurora Industries. Family dynasty crumbles. Entire Miller board resigns. The kitchen-to-corner office. How an outcast heiress conquered her family's empire. I sat in what used to be Uncle James's office, watching the stock price climb as the market reacted to the news. My phone hadn't stopped buzzing since dawn. Uncle James, we need to talk. Family means something. Aunt Catherine, Darling, let's discuss this over brunch at the club. Elizabeth, you can't just destroy our lives like this. Michael, think about the family legacy. I forwarded them all to my legal team with one note: document the harassment. Sarah walked in with the morning briefing. The transition team is ready. Should we start with the executive floor? Yes, I smiled, looking at the blueprints. Remove the mahogany paneling first. I want glass walls. Transparency will be our new policy. And the family portraits in the boardroom? Replace them with our company values. Merit, innovation, inclusion. I paused. And put a special one in the kitchen. Success is served at every table. My assistant's voice came through the intercom. Ms. Miller, your family is in the lobby. All of them. I checked the security feed. They looked different now, disheveled, desperate. Elizabeth's Hermes scarf was askew. Michael's confident smirk was gone. Aunt Catherine's perfect makeup couldn't hide her fear. Send them up, I said. It's time for their exit interviews. They filed in like scolded children, standing awkwardly before the desk where Uncle James had once held court. The kitchen's that way, I pointed, watching them flinch. In case any of you feel more comfortable there. Alexandra, Uncle James stepped forward, his voice hoarse. We can fix this. Whatever grievances you have. Grievances. I opened a thick folder. 20 years of systematic exclusion. 15 denied promotions. 10 years of being seated in kitchens and hallways. And one particularly memorable Christmas where you said I'd never understand real business. I closed the folder. Those aren't grievances. They're motivations. We were protecting you, Aunt Catherine pleaded. No, I corrected. You were protecting yourselves. Your positions. Your power. Well, congratulations. You lost it all. Elizabeth burst into tears. What about our jobs? Our reputations? Your jobs? I smiled. Oh, you'll have to interview for them like everyone else. Merit-based hiring, imagine that concept. As for reputations, I turned my laptop to show them the trending business news. I'd say those are already handled. Michael, always the strategist, tried a different approach. The Miller name still means something. We could work together, show a united front. The Miller name meant everything to you, I agreed. Until today. Aurora Industries is acquiring all rights to the Miller brand. You can keep your name, but the business legacy you're so proud of? That belongs to me now. I pressed a button on my intercom. Send them in. The door opened and a group of young executives entered, all women and minorities who'd been previously overlooked by Miller Enterprises' old guard. Meet your new management team, I announced. All highly qualified professionals who understand that success isn't inherited, it's earned. This is revenge, Aunt Catherine whispered. This is business, I corrected. Something you claimed I'd never understand. Though I do have one special position in mind. I turned to Elizabeth. The kitchen staff needs a new manager. You'll find the uniform more comfortable than those designer suits you can't afford anymore. Later that evening, as the sun set over the city, I walked through the empty offices. The cleaning crew was removing the old Miller Enterprises logos, replacing them with Aurora's rising sun. In the boardroom, the family portraits were being taken down, making way for a new vision. My phone buzzed one last time, a text from the family group chat I'd been excluded from for years. Family dinner this Sunday. Your aunt's house. Please come. I typed back, sorry, busy with a merger. But I hear the kitchen has excellent seating. Then I blocked the number and turned to the window, watching my reflection overlap with the city lights. The scared girl they'd banished to the kitchen was gone. In her place stood a CEO who'd learned that the best revenge isn't just taking over their company, it's running it better than they ever could. 1 week later, I received an invitation to speak at my old business school. The topic? Breaking the glass ceiling and the family china. I accepted immediately. The first line of my speech would be simple. Sometimes the best view of success isn't from the head of the table, it's from the kitchen where you can watch them choke on their own pride. Because in the end, success isn't about where you sit at dinner. It's about owning the whole restaurant. Me. I was just getting started. The next morning, I called a company-wide meeting. Every employee, from janitors to executives, was invited, something the old regime had never done. Miller Enterprises was built on exclusion, I told them. Aurora rises through inclusion. Everyone here has value. Everyone here has a voice. And no one will ever be sent to the kitchen unless they're the head chef. The applause was deafening. Sometimes the person they underestimate the most becomes the one they can never overcome. And sometimes the best revenge isn't just winning, it's changing the whole game. As for my family, they're learning that success isn't served on a silver platter. Sometimes it's cooked up in the kitchen by the very person they thought would never have a seat at the table. Now I own the table. And they're the ones left hungry for what they lost. Make sure you clean under the desks properly this time, Barbara from HR sneered, not bothering to look up from her designer phone case as I pushed my cleaning cart past her office. The last cleaning lady was fired for missing spots. I adjusted my simple gray uniform, feeling the weight of my Harvard MBA diploma and the CEO appointment letter in my shoulder bag. 2 weeks into my undercover mission to understand global dynamics from the ground up, and I'd already filled 3 notebooks with observations about the company's toxic culture. Yes, ma'am, I replied softly, maintaining my carefully crafted persona of Elena Martinez, the new evening cleaning staff member. The board had insisted I take 3 months to quietly assess the company before officially stepping in as CEO, but they hadn't specified how I should do it. My decision to start from the bottom had raised some eyebrows among my fellow executives, but I knew that real change had to begin with understanding the foundation. Oh, and Elena? Barbara called out, her voice dripping with condescension. Mr. Richardson's office needs extra attention. Board meeting tomorrow, you know. Not that you need to worry about such things. If she only knew that I'd be leading that board meeting. I pushed my cart toward the executive floor, passing Michael from accounting who was openly berating a junior analyst. This is why we keep people like you in the basement, he was saying. Can't even handle basic spreadsheets. The analyst's eyes were brimming with tears. I made a mental note in my hidden phone app. Toxic management in accounting, immediate intervention needed. The executive floor was a monument to corporate excess. While the lower floors had flickering fluorescent lights and cramped cubicles, up here the halls were lined with expensive art and custom carpeting. The disparity was exactly what the board had hired me to address, though they didn't know I'd discover it quite so personally. Hey, cleaning lady. Vice President David Chen called out as I entered his office. Be careful with those awards on my shelf. They're worth more than you make in a year. I glanced at the awards while dusting them, mostly golf tournament trophies and networking excellence certificates. Meanwhile, the real industry accolades I'd earned were sitting in a box in my apartment, waiting to be hung in this very office once I took over. And don't touch any papers on my desk, he added, barely looking up from his game of mobile solitaire. Confidential business matters. Though I suppose that's not something you need to worry about. The papers he was so concerned about were merger proposals I'd already reviewed and rejected last week during my confidential meetings with the board. His brilliant strategy for aggressive acquisition would have bankrupted 3 smaller companies and cost thousands of jobs. My phone vibrated silently, a message from the board chairman. Tomorrow's meeting's still on schedule. New CEO introduction at 10 a.m. Have you selected your approach? I smiled behind my mask as I typed back. Everything arranged. Expect surprises. Elena. The sharp voice of Marketing Director Sarah Williams cut through my thoughts. There's a coffee stain in the conference room. The board meeting is tomorrow morning. If that room isn't perfect, you'll be looking for a new job. I hurried to the conference room, playing my part while mentally reorganizing the marketing department's leadership structure. Sarah's file on my laptop was already marked for immediate review. As I cleaned the conference room table where I'd be sitting at the head tomorrow, I could hear executives in the hallway discussing the mysterious new CEO. Probably another stuffed shirt from Wall Street, David Chen was saying. We'll show them how things really work around here. I heard it's someone from Silicon Valley, Sarah Williams replied. Some tech hotshot who thinks they can revolutionize everything. As long as they know to leave us alone and let us run our departments, Barbara added. I've been managing HR for 15 years. No one knows this company better than me. I suppressed a laugh, thinking about the comprehensive reform plan sitting in my briefcase. 15 years of toxic management was exactly what I'd been hired to fix. The evening wore on as I cleaned each office, gathering intelligence that would prove invaluable in the coming months. Every dismissive comment, every display of arrogance, every instance of mismanagement was carefully noted in my hidden recordings. At 9 p.m. as I was finishing up, CFO Richard Thompson stormed past me, barking into his phone. "I don't care what the numbers show. Make them look better before the new CEO arrives. And get that cleaning lady out of my sight. I can't focus with the help hovering around." I packed up my cleaning supplies, changed out of my uniform in the staff bathroom, and headed home to prepare for tomorrow. My designer suit was pressed, my presentation was ready, and my security badge identifying me as Elena Martinez, CEO, was sitting on my nightstand. The next morning would be interesting indeed. The morning of the board meeting dawned bright and clear. I arrived early, still wearing my cleaning uniform, to do one final sweep of the executive floor. The nervous energy was palpable as executives rushed around, preparing for the mysterious new CEO's arrival. "Elena," Barbara snapped, tottering past in her Louboutins. "What are you still doing here? We need the cleaning staff gone before the new CEO arrives. We can't have your kind visible during important meetings." "Of course, ma'am," I replied softly, making a show of gathering my cleaning supplies. "I'll just finish up in the conference room." "Make it quick," she hissed. "And for heaven's sake, don't let anyone important see you." As I pushed my cart toward the conference room, I passed David Chen rehearsing what appeared to be a power play speech in his office mirror. "Now about your proposed changes," he practiced, straightening his tie. "While we appreciate fresh perspectives, we have systems in place that have worked for years." If he only knew that my first act as CEO would be dismantling those very systems. The conference room was already filling with nervous energy and expensive cologne as board members and executives arrived. I kept my head down as I made one final pass with the cleaning supplies, catching snippets of their conversations. "Heard the new CEO is some hotshot reformer," Michael from accounting whispered. "Please," Sarah Williams scoffed. "Give them a month. They'll learn to play by our rules or they'll be gone like the last three who tried to change things." I thought about the folder in my briefcase documenting exactly how they'd undermined previous reform attempts. That folder would make for interesting reading at tomorrow's HR review. At 9:45 I slipped out and headed to the executive bathroom with my change of clothes. The transformation from Elena the cleaner to Elena the CEO took exactly 12 minutes. Just enough time to switch my uniform for a tailored Armani suit and transform my carefully tied back hair into a professional style. My phone buzzed with a message from the board chairman. "Ready when you are." They have no idea. Another from my executive assistant who'd been in on the plan. "Everyone's seated. The show is about to begin." I checked my reflection one last time, straightening the CEO badge that would soon shock everyone in that room. 2 weeks of being treated like I was invisible were about to pay off in spectacular fashion. At precisely 10 a.m., I heard the board chairman's voice through the conference room doors. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome your new chief executive officer." I pushed open the doors and walked in, heels clicking purposefully on the marble floor. The room fell into stunned silence as recognition slowly dawned on their faces. Barbara's coffee cup slipped from her fingers, spilling onto her designer suit. David Chen's practiced speech died in his throat. Sarah Williams' perfectly maintained composure cracked like cheap foundation. "Good morning," I said clearly, taking my place at the head of the table. "I believe some of you know me as Elena. I've spent the past 2 weeks getting to know this company from the ground up. Now let's discuss what I've learned." This is impossible," Barbara stammered. "You're the cleaning lady." "Actually," I smiled, sliding my CEO badge across the table. "I'm Elena Martinez, Harvard MBA, former CEO of Tech Innovations and your new chief executive. Though I have learned quite a lot about the state of this company while pushing that cleaning cart." I opened my laptop, connecting it to the presentation screen. "Shall we begin with what I observed in human resources, Barbara? Your comments about my kind were particularly illuminating." The color drained from her face as I pulled up my first slide, a comprehensive documentation of every discriminatory comment, every instance of mismanagement, every example of toxic culture I'd witnessed. "Or perhaps," I continued, turning to David Chen, "we should discuss those confidential papers you were so worried about? The ones detailing your rejected merger proposals that I'd already reviewed last month." David's attempt at a confident smile looked more like a grimace. "Better yet," I turned to Sarah Williams. Let's talk about marketing's creative approach to employee intimidation. I particularly enjoyed your threats about my job security last night. The board chairman was trying to hide his smile as the executives squirmed in their seats. This was exactly why he'd supported my unconventional approach to assessing the company. Now, I said, standing up to face the stunned room, let's discuss the changes that are going to happen at Global Dynamics. Starting with a complete restructuring of senior management. The next hour was a masterclass in corporate reform, delivered by the woman they'd dismissed as part of the help for 2 weeks. The days following my revelation were a fascinating study in human behavior. The same executives who'd barely acknowledged my existence now practically tripped over themselves trying to curry favor. Barbara from HR sent a desperate email at 3 a.m. Dear Ms. Martinez, I sincerely apologize for any misunderstandings during your observation period. My comments about your kind were taken out of context. I have always been a strong advocate for diversity and inclusion. I forwarded it to my executive assistant with one note. Add to the documentation file. Schedule exit interview for Friday. David Chin attempted damage control by leaving an expensive bottle of wine on my desk with a note. Ms. Martinez. Those confidential papers you mentioned. Perhaps we could discuss my vision for the company over dinner? I've always believed in progressive leadership. The wine joined the growing collection of desperate peace offerings in my office closet. The note joined Barbara's email in the documentation file. Sarah Williams tried a different approach, camping outside my office with a PowerPoint presentation titled, Marketing's Revolutionary New Direction. She'd changed her signature designer suits for more modest attire, apparently thinking I'd be impressed by this superficial transformation. Ms. Martinez, she called out as I passed, I've completely reimagined our corporate culture initiatives. Fascinating, I replied, not breaking stride. Send it to HR. Though you might want to wait until Monday, we'll have new leadership by then. The whispers in the hallways had shifted from condescension to fear. She recorded everything. 2 weeks of cleaning offices. Heard she has files on everyone. Complete restructuring coming. My phone buzzed constantly with messages from board members, impressed with how much I'd uncovered during my undercover period. Chairman, the toxic culture runs deeper than we thought. Your approach was unorthodox but effective. Director Stevens, no wonder the last 3 COs failed. They never saw the real problems. Director Wong, ready to support whatever changes you deem necessary. I called an all-staff meeting for Monday morning. Every employee from executives to maintenance staff was required to attend. The grand auditorium filled with nervous energy as people filed in, the usual social hierarchies disrupted as no one quite knew where to sit anymore. Good morning, I began, standing at the podium. Many of you knew me as Elena the cleaning lady. Some of you were kind to me during those 2 weeks. Others. I paused, letting my gaze sweep over the uncomfortable executives, were less so. Today we're going to discuss what that reveals about our company culture. I clicked to the first slide, a comprehensive organizational chart with red marks through multiple executive positions. Effective immediately, Global Dynamics is undergoing a complete restructuring. The following changes will be implemented. The room held its collective breath. First, Barbara Thompson is no longer head of human resources. Her replacement will be Janet Chin from our maintenance staff, a qualified HR professional with a master's degree who's been working as a janitor because of systematic discrimination in our hiring practices. Barbara's outraged gasp was audible even from the back of the auditorium. Second, David Chen's position as vice president is being eliminated. His responsibilities will be distributed among a team of junior analysts, the same ones he repeatedly belittled and undermined. David slumped in his seat, his practiced confidence finally shattered. Third, the entire marketing department will be restructured. Sarah Williams, your new position will be in customer service. Perhaps direct interaction with the people you've been marketing to will provide valuable perspective. Sarah's perfectly maintained facade cracked completely as she burst into tears. Additionally, I continued, every executive who made discriminatory comments or displayed abusive behavior during my observation period will be required to work 1 month in entry-level positions. Consider it a learning opportunity. The stunned silence was broken by scattered applause from the lower-level employees. Moving forward, promotions will be based on merit, not networking. Salaries will be adjusted for equity. The executive floor will be converted into a communal workspace. And yes, I smiled, the cleaning staff will receive the same benefits as management. I clicked to the next slide, security footage showing various instances of misconduct I'd witnessed. This is who we were. This is not who we will be. Global Dynamics is no longer a playground for entitled executives. It's going to become what it should have been all along, a company where talent and hard work matter more than status and connections. The applause was louder now, spreading through the audience like a wave. One final note, I added. My cleaning cart will remain in my office. Not as a reminder of these past 2 weeks, but as a reminder that no job, no person, no contribution is beneath our respect. The aftermath was exactly what I'd expected. Resignations poured in from executives unwilling to adapt. LinkedIn profiles were hastily updated. Legal threats were made and quickly withdrawn when faced with my comprehensive documentation. But something else happened too. Innovation increased. Productivity soared. Employee satisfaction scores rose dramatically. Turns out people work better when they're not terrified of their superiors or dismissed for their position. 1 month later, I received an email from Barbara, now working as an entry-level HR assistant. Ms. Martinez, I never knew how hard these jobs were. How much skill they required. How much dignity mattered. I understand now why you did what you did. * Barbara. I forwarded it to Janet, our new HR director, with a note. Perhaps there's hope for her after all. David Chen's customer service recordings showed a man learning humility the hard way. Sarah Williams actually excelled in her new role, once she stopped trying to prove her superiority. 6 months later, Global Dynamics was featured in Business Week. The undercover CEO who cleaned house literally. The article praised our revolutionary approach to corporate culture and highlighted our improved performance metrics. But my favorite part was the photo they used, me in my CEO suit, standing next to my cleaning cart, surrounded by a diverse group of employees who no longer had to pretend to be something they weren't. My phone buzzed with a message from the board chairman. You didn't just clean house. You rebuilt it. Well done. I smiled, thinking about all the executives who'd dismissed me, looking down on the cleaning lady who was silently taking notes about their behavior. Thank you, I replied. Sometimes the best way to clean up a company is to start from the bottom. And sometimes the most important perspective comes from being invisible. I looked out my office window, no longer on the executive floor but in an open workspace where anyone could reach me. The cleaning cart sat in the corner, a reminder that respect isn't earned by position but by character. The heart monitor's steady beep echoed through Central Metropolitan Hospital's ICU as I checked Mr. Chen's vitals for the 3rd time that hour. Everything looked stable but something felt off. After 15 years as a cardiac nurse, I'd learned to trust my instincts. Blood pressure's dropping again, I murmured, making a note in the chart. And that ST elevation. Problem, Nurse Roberts? Dr. Walker's voice dripped with condescension as he strode into the room, white coat fluttering like a cape. The chief of cardiology barely glanced at the monitors before shaking his head. Everything's within normal parameters. Just follow the standard protocol. I bit my tongue, holding back the words that wanted to escape. He hadn't noticed the subtle changes in the EKG pattern, the warning signs I'd been tracking for the past 2 hours. But then again, why would he? I was just a nurse. At least that's all they knew about me at Central Metropolitan. None of them knew about my other life, the research I conducted at night in my small home office, or the papers I published under my full name, Dr. Sarah Roberts, Ph.D. They didn't know about the experimental cardiac procedure I'd developed, currently under review by the FDA. A procedure that might be exactly what James Chen needed right now. Yes, Dr. Walker, I said quietly, watching him sweep out of the room. Once he was gone, I pulled out my phone and sent a quick text to Dr. Maria Torres at Johns Hopkins. Need your eyes on something. Possible candidate for the Roberts protocol. James Chen wasn't just any patient. The 45-year-old tech billionaire had been admitted 3 days ago with chest pains, and every specialist in the hospital was watching his case closely. His company, Chen Innovations, was on the verge of releasing revolutionary quantum computing technology. The stock market was holding its breath, waiting to see if he'd recover. I'd been assigned as his primary nurse, a decision that had raised eyebrows among the hospital administration. "Are you sure we want to put a regular nurse in charge of such a high-profile case?" I'd overheard Dr. Patterson, the hospital director, ask during rounds. What they didn't know was that I'd requested the assignment specifically. I'd been following Chen's case from the moment he was admitted, recognizing symptoms that matched my research exactly. His condition was deteriorating in a pattern I'd documented in my latest paper. A pattern that traditional treatments might not address in time. My phone buzzed with Maria's reply, "Sending you the latest trial results. Your instincts are usually right. Keep me posted." I glanced at Mr. Chen, who was sleeping fitfully. His wife Jenny sat beside him, dark circles under her eyes betraying her exhaustion. She looked up as I checked the 4 lines. "How is he really doing?" she asked softly. "I know they keep saying he's stable, but..." I hesitated, choosing my words carefully. "There are some patterns I'm watching closely. Would you like me to explain what I'm seeing?" She nodded eagerly, and I spent the next few minutes walking her through the subtle changes in his condition, explaining in clear, simple terms what each indicator meant. Unlike many of the doctors, I didn't try to minimize her concerns or talk down to her. "You understand all this so well," she said, looking at me with new interest. "How long have you been studying cardiac care?" "A long time," I replied, keeping my voice neutral. "I've developed a particular interest in unusual presentation patterns like your husband's case." Before she could ask more questions, the monitors suddenly erupted in a chorus of alarms. Chen's blood pressure was plummeting, his heart rhythm becoming erratic. Code blue. I hit the emergency button, already moving to start chest compressions. The room filled with medical personnel as the code team responded. Dr. Walker burst in, barking orders. "Get me the crash cart. Start the standard protocol." "Wait," I said, still doing compressions. "Look at the pattern. This isn't a standard cardiac event. The ST changes suggest..." "Nurse Roberts," Walker cut me off sharply, "step aside and let the real doctors handle this." I stood my ground, continuing compressions. "His condition matches an atypical presentation I've been researching. There's an experimental protocol." "Enough." Walker's face was red with anger. "Security, get her out of here. She's interfering with patient care." As a security guard moved toward me, Jenny Chen's voice rang out. "Wait. Let her speak." "What protocol?" Walker scoffed. "Mrs. Chen, with all due respect, this is just a nurse trying to overstep her. It's called the Roberts Protocol," I said clearly, still focused on keeping Chen's heart beating. "Currently in final phase trials at Johns Hopkins. It's designed specifically for cases like this, where traditional interventions may be counterproductive." "The Roberts Protocol?" One of the younger doctors looked up sharply. "I just read about that in the New England Journal of Medicine. But that was developed by Dr. Sarah Roberts, a cardiac researcher." "Yes," I said, meeting Walker's stunned gaze. "That would be me. Dr. Sarah Roberts, PhD. And if we don't implement the protocol in the next 10 minutes, Mr. Chen's chances of survival drop by 60%. The room fell silent except for the wailing monitors and the sound of my continued compressions. Walker's face went through a rapid series of emotions: disbelief, anger, confusion, and finally, a grudging realization. "Prove it," he said tersely. I nodded to Jenny. "Mrs. Chen, my phone. Could you pull up my ID from Johns Hopkins and my latest research paper?" She grabbed my phone, quickly finding the documents. Her eyes widened as she read. "It's true. She's actually Dr. Roberts, the one who developed the procedure." Walker looked like he'd swallowed something sour, but Chen's deteriorating condition left no room for ego. "Fine. What do you need?" For the next hour, I directed a team of doctors and nurses through the protocol I'd spent years developing. It was surreal watching them follow my instructions, seeing the respect gradually replace skepticism in their eyes as Chen's condition began to stabilize. By dawn, Chen was stable, his vital signs improving steadily. Jenny had fallen asleep in her chair, holding her husband's hand. I stood at the nurse's station, updating his chart when Walker approached. "How long?" he asked, his voice tight. "How long have you been working as just a nurse?" while holding a PhD and conducting groundbreaking research? I finished my notation before answering. 5 years at this hospital. 15 years total in nursing. The PhD is from Johns Hopkins, completed while working night shifts. The research is ongoing, funded by private grants. But why? He gestured around the hospital floor. Why work as a nurse when you could be? Because this is where I see what really happens. I cut him off. Not in a lab, not in clinical trials, but here on the floor watching how conditions present in real patients. Every theory I've developed, every breakthrough in my research, came from observations I made while working as a nurse. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. Finally, he managed, "The hospital board is meeting in an hour. They'll want to talk to you." I nodded, knowing this was just the beginning. The quiet life I'd built, balancing bedside nursing with academic research, was about to change dramatically. But as I looked at Chen's improving vital signs, I knew it had been worth it. Sometimes the best way to change the system isn't to fight it from the outside, but to work quietly within it, gathering knowledge and waiting for the right moment to reveal your true expertise. And sometimes when that moment comes, it saves more than just one life. It changes the way people think about expertise itself. The hospital boardroom felt smaller than I remembered. Perhaps it was the crowd. Every department head, administrator, and senior physician had somehow found reason to attend this emergency meeting. They sat around the massive oak table, stealing glances at me as I waited quietly in my nursing scrubs. Dr. Patterson, the hospital director, cleared his throat. "Dr. Roberts, or should I say Nurse Roberts, this is an unprecedented situation." "Sarah will do fine," I said calmly, placing my research portfolio on the table. "And yes, I imagine having a nurse save your highest profile patient using her own experimental protocol is rather unprecedented." A few people shifted uncomfortably. Dr. Walker sat rigidly in his chair, his face an interesting shade of purple. "Your credentials are impressive," Patterson continued, flipping through my file. "PhD from Johns Hopkins, multiple published papers, principal investigator on 3 major cardiac research studies. What we're struggling to understand is why you chose to work here as a nurse while conducting this research." I looked around the room at all these brilliant minds who'd never thought to look beyond titles and hierarchies. Do you know how many hours I spent at patients' bedsides developing the Roberts protocol? How many subtle symptoms I noticed because I was there, doing the simple work of patient care? The room was silent now, really listening. Every breakthrough in my research came from direct patient observation. Things you don't see in lab results or 15-minute rounds. That's why I chose to remain in nursing while conducting research. It's not about hiding expertise, it's about gathering it from the ground up. Jenny Chin chose that moment to enter the room, followed by the hospital's legal counsel. "I hope I'm not interrupting," she said, though her tone suggested she didn't particularly care if she was. "But I thought you should know that my husband is awake and recovering remarkably well." She placed a document on the table. "We've also decided to make a donation to Central Metropolitan. $50 million specifically earmarked for establishing a new research division. One that integrates clinical practice with research at all levels of patient care." Patterson's eyes widened. "Mrs. Chin, we're incredibly grateful. The donation," Jenny continued firmly, "comes with one condition. Dr. Sarah Roberts will head the new division, with full autonomy to implement her integrated care model." The silence that followed was deafening. I could almost hear the mental calculations happening around the table. $50 million versus traditional hospital hierarchies. "That's a very generous offer," I said carefully. "But I have some conditions of my own." Now everyone was staring at me. Who was this nurse/doctor/researcher who dared put conditions on a $50 million donation? First, the new division will include positions for nurse researchers. Not just nurses assisting research, but nurses conducting their own studies, supported by the hospital. Patterson nodded slowly. "That's innovative." Second, we implement a new training program that breaks down the artificial barriers between different medical roles. Doctors will spend time doing direct patient care. Nurses will have opportunities to contribute to research and treatment planning. "That's completely unorthodox," Walker protested, finding his voice. "You can't expect attending physicians to understand all aspects of patient care?" I finished for him. Shli, I can. And I will. Because that's how we advance medicine. By learning from every perspective, not just the ones with prestigious titles. Jenny Chin smiled. I like these conditions. Add them to the donation requirements. The next few hours were a blur of discussions, negotiations, and planning. By evening, I had an office on the research floor, a team beginning to form, and a mountain of paperwork to process. But as I made my evening rounds, yes, I insisted on keeping some clinical duties. I knew the real work was just beginning. Word spread quickly through the hospital. Nurses who'd worked alongside me for years came by to express their surprise, their support, and sometimes their own hidden aspirations. I've been working on a research proposal about patient recovery patterns, Lisa, a veteran ICU nurse, confided. But I never thought. Submit it to me by Friday, I told her. The new division needs good research, regardless of where it comes from. James Chin recovered fully and returned to his company, but he didn't forget what happened. 6 months later, he established a national foundation promoting medical research by frontline healthcare workers. The first grant recipients included 3 nurses from our hospital, each with innovative research proposals grown from years of patient observation. Dr. Walker struggled with the changes at first, but eventually something shifted. Maybe it was seeing the results of our integrated approach, or maybe it was his own experience working alongside nurses in the new program. One day he stopped by my office. I was wrong, he said simply. Not just about you, but about the whole way we've structured medical care and research. It's a hard system to change, I acknowledged. We've all been trained to think in hierarchies. The Roberts Protocol isn't just about cardiac care, is it? He asked. It's about changing how we see expertise itself. I smiled. He was finally getting it. The changes at Central Metropolitan became a model for other hospitals. Our integrated research program produced breakthrough after breakthrough, each one proving that medical innovation can come from any level of patient care. The artificial barriers between nurses, doctors, and researchers began to dissolve, replaced by a more collaborative approach. 1 year after that fateful night with James Chin, I stood in the hospital auditorium, addressing a new class of medical residents and nursing students. Look around this room, I told them. Every person here, regardless of their title or role, has the potential to advance medical science. Your insights matter. Your observations matter. And most importantly, your willingness to look beyond traditional hierarchies matters. In the back of the room, I saw Jenny Chin nodding. She joined our hospital board and become a fierce advocate for integrated medical care. Beside her sat James Chin, fully recovered and deeply invested in our program's success. The changes weren't always easy. Some old guard physicians resigned rather than adapt to the new model. Some administrators struggled with the flatter organizational structure. But the results spoke for themselves. Better patient outcomes, more innovative research, and a more satisfied medical staff. Lisa, the ICU nurse who'd nervously shared her research proposal, now heads her own research team. Her work on patient recovery patterns has been published in major medical journals, and she still works regular nursing shifts to stay connected to direct patient care. Dr. Walker, to everyone's surprise, became one of our strongest advocates. His experience learning from nurses and other staff transformed his approach to medicine. He now teaches a course on integrated medical care, using his own journey from skeptic to believer as a teaching tool. As for me, I maintain my dual role, researcher and nurse, leader and caregiver. My office stayed on the patient floor rather than in the administrative wing, and I continued to take regular shifts providing direct patient care. Don't you miss just being a researcher? A young resident asked me recently. It must be exhausting maintaining both roles. I thought about the night we saved James Chin, about how years of bedside nursing had informed my research in ways no laboratory could match. I'm not maintaining 2 roles, I told her. I'm living proof that these artificial divisions we've created in medicine don't serve our patients or our profession. Every time I work a nursing shift, I'm researching. Every time I develop a new protocol, I'm drawing on my nursing experience. Last week, I received a letter from a small community hospital in rural Minnesota. They're implementing their own version of our integrated care model. The letter was signed by both their chief of medicine and their head nurse. A small detail that made me smile. The Roberts Protocol is now standard care for certain cardiac conditions, but its greater legacy is the change it sparked in medical culture. In hospitals across the country, nurses are conducting research, doctors are learning from bedside caregivers, and patients are benefiting from a more collaborative approach to medicine. Sometimes I think back to that night when everything changed, when a crisis forced everyone to look past titles and see expertise for what it really was. Just a nurse who saved a billionaire's life became a symbol of something larger. The recognition that knowledge and innovation can come from anywhere, if we're just willing to look past our preconceptions. As I write this from my office, watching doctors and nurses collaborate on a new research protocol, I'm reminded of something I told the hospital board that first morning. True expertise isn't about titles or hierarchies. It's about the wisdom to learn from every perspective, the courage to challenge old systems, and the understanding that the best insights often come from the people closest to the work. The heart monitor's steady beep still echoes through our ICU, but now it's accompanied by something new, the sound of all voices being heard, all expertise being valued, and all of us working together to advance the science of healing. Sometimes the best revenge isn't about proving others wrong. It's about proving that there's a better way forward, one that benefits everyone. And sometimes, the quietest person in the room, the one everyone underestimated, turns out to be the one who changes everything. The mahogany-paneled law office felt too warm as I sat listening to my wealthy relatives argue over Grandma Rose's estate. My name is Sophie Chen, and I just inherited what everyone else in the family considered the booby prize, a small antique shop in San Francisco's historic district called Rose's Treasures. I still can't believe Mom left that gold mine property in Pacific Heights to a part-time art teacher. Aunt Margaret's voice dripped with disdain as she glared at me from across the conference table. She'd already secured the beach house in Carmel and was bitter about not getting the San Francisco property too. My cousin Blake, fresh from his MBA program, smirked while scrolling through his phone. The shop's property taxes alone will bankrupt her within a year. Maybe then she'll sell it to someone who knows its real value. I kept my face carefully neutral, remembering the last conversation I'd had with Grandma Rose just 2 weeks before she passed. She'd insisted I visit her at the shop after hours, something she'd never done before. "The others see money but you see stories," she'd said, her small frame dwarfed by the towering shelves of antiques. "That's why you're the only one who ever helped me in the shop, the only one who listened to the history behind each piece." She'd been different that night, more intense than her usual gentle self. "Sophie, when the time comes, remember, every rose has its secrets, and the greatest treasures are hidden in plain sight." Now, watching my relatives divide up her wealth like vultures, I understood why she'd been so cryptic. "Ms. Chen." Mr. Wong, the family lawyer, interrupted my thoughts. "Here are the keys to the shop and all relevant documentation." He slid a thick envelope across the table, his expression unreadable. As I reached for it, my cousin Amanda's designer bracelet clinked against her crystal water glass. "God, Sophie, at least try to look grateful. You're getting a piece of prime real estate, even if it is full of worthless junk." I thought about the countless Saturdays I'd spent at the shop with Grandma Rose, learning the stories behind each antique. The Ming vase that had survived a revolution. The Victorian music box that still played perfectly after 150 years. The Art Deco cigarette case that had belonged to a 1920s film star. To them it was all just worthless junk. "Thank you," I said quietly, gathering my things. "I am grateful." "Oh wait," Blake called out as I reached the door. "When you're ready to sell and you will be, give me a call. I know some developers who'd love to tear down that eyesore and build something useful." I left without responding, but their laughter followed me down the hallway. Outside, San Francisco's familiar fog was rolling in, softening the edges of the city. I took a cab to the shop, watching the familiar streets pass by. Rose's Treasures sat on a corner that time seemed to have forgotten. The Victorian building's deep burgundy paint was fading, and the gold lettering on the windows had begun to peel, but it still had the same magical quality I remembered from my childhood. Even closed, the windows displayed an enchanting array of artifacts that caught the eye and sparked the imagination. My hands trembled slightly as I fitted the old brass key into the lock. The door opened with the same musical chime it had made for 40 years. Grandma had refused to replace the antique bell with anything modern. Inside, the shop smelled of lemon polish and history. Dust motes danced in the late afternoon light that filtered through the tall windows. Everything was exactly as it had been the last time I'd visited Grandma Rose, from the carefully arranged display cases to the comfortable old leather chair where she used to sit and tell me stories. I moved through the space slowly, running my fingers along familiar surfaces. The massive oak counter with its ancient brass cash register. The wall of miniature portraits that Grandma swore could tell you their subjects' secrets if you looked at them long enough. The collection of pocket watches, all stopped at different moments in time. Near the back office I paused. Something was different. A small table that had always held a collection of Victorian silver had been cleared except for a single rose in a crystal vase. The rose was made of paper, crafted with exquisite detail, its petals a deep crimson. "Every rose has its secrets," I whispered, remembering Grandma's words. Carefully I lifted the paper flower. Underneath was a key I'd never seen before, smaller and more ornate than the others. Attached to it was a note in Grandma's elegant handwriting. "Some treasures can only be found by those who understand their true value. Look where the light meets the shadows at the 4th hour." I checked my watch. 5:30 p.m. Whatever Grandma had planned, I'd have to wait until tomorrow to solve her riddle. The next few hours were spent familiarizing myself with the shop's paperwork. The financial records were impeccable, despite my relatives' assumptions about Grandma's business acumen. The shop wasn't making millions, but it was far from failing. As I worked, I noticed little things that seemed out of place. The arrangement of certain items had changed since my last visit. Some pieces had been moved to unusually prominent positions, while others had been tucked away in corners where they'd barely be noticed. "What were you planning, Grandma?" I murmured, looking around the shop with new eyes. A knock at the front door startled me. Through the window I saw Mr. Wong, the family lawyer. Curious, I let him in. "Miss Chen," he said formally, glancing around as if checking that we were alone. "There are some things about your grandmother's estate that couldn't be discussed at the official reading." He pulled an envelope from his briefcase. "She left this with explicit instructions that it was to be given to you privately 24 hours after the will reading." The envelope contained a single sheet of paper with a series of numbers that looked like coordinates or measurements. At the bottom was another cryptic message. "The past holds the key to the future, but only if you know where to look. Trust no one until you find what I've hidden." "Mr. Wong," I started, but he held up his hand. "I don't know what's in play here, Miss Chen, but I should warn you, your relatives have already filed challenges to the will. They believe your grandmother wasn't in her right mind when she made her final changes." "Changes?" He nodded gravely. "She updated her will just 3 weeks before she passed, specifically to ensure you got the shop. Whatever she left for you to find, I suggest you find it quickly." After he left, I sat in Grandma's old leather chair, thinking. The shop had always been more than just a business to her. It was a repository of stories, of history, of secrets. Now it seemed she had woven me into one of those secrets. I spread out the papers on the counter, the key, the coordinates, the warning. Whatever Grandma had hidden, my relatives couldn't know about it until I found it first. Their greed was obvious and their resources significant. I had until the next morning to solve the first part of her puzzle. As night fell over San Francisco, I moved through the shop, really looking at the changes Grandma had made in her final weeks. The Victorian silver moved to make room for the paper rose. The rearranged portraits. The pocket watches. I stopped suddenly, staring at the watch display. Every single watch was set to 4 o'clock. "Look where the light meets the shadows at the 4th hour," I whispered. Somewhere in this shop, when the morning light hit just right, Grandma had left the next piece of her puzzle. But as I looked around at the hundreds of potential hiding places, I realized finding it wouldn't be easy. And somewhere out in the city, my relatives were already plotting to take away whatever Grandma had wanted me to find. The game was on, and I had until sunrise to prepare for whatever the morning light would reveal. I spent the night in the shop, not daring to leave in case my relatives tried something while I was gone. Around 3 a.m., I discovered a folder hidden behind the cash register, photographs of the shop taken at different times of day, with careful notes about how the light fell through the tall Victorian windows. Grandma had been planning this for months. At precisely 3:45 a.m., I heard a car pull up outside. Through the window I recognized Blake's Tesla. He and Amanda were trying to break in, thinking the shop would be empty. I smiled in the darkness, remembering how Grandma had upgraded the security system last year, something none of them knew about. The silent alarm was already alerting the police. "The lock's new," I heard Blake whisper. "The old lady must have changed it." "Just hurry up," Amanda hissed. "We need to find whatever she hid before that idiot Sophie figures it out." 2 police cars arrived silently, lights off. I watched with satisfaction as my cousins were escorted away, their protests about family property falling on deaf ears. The officers took my statement and I showed them the will proving my ownership. By the time they left, it was almost 4 a.m. The first hint of dawn was starting to lighten the sky. I positioned myself in Grandma's chair, watching as the shadows began their slow dance across the shop floor. At exactly 4 o'clock, the morning light pierced through the front windows, creating a precise pattern of light and shadow. That's when I saw it. The light hit a Victorian mirror on the far wall, bouncing off at an angle to illuminate a specific floorboard, one that had been so skillfully replaced that I'd missed it during my night of searching. The grain of the wood was slightly different, and in the dramatic sideways lighting, I could see it had been recently moved. My hands shook as I pried it up carefully. Inside was a small leather-bound journal and another key, this one modern and unmarked. The journal was written in Grandma's distinctive hand. "My dearest Sophie, if you're reading this, you've already proven you inherited more than just my shop. You've inherited my patience and attention to detail. What I'm about to tell you must be kept secret until exactly the right moment. 20 years ago, when your grandfather died, everyone thought he left me nothing but this shop. They were wrong. Over the years, he and I built something extraordinary, but we knew our family's greed would destroy it if they ever discovered the truth. The coordinates I left you aren't for a location, they're the combination to a hidden safe. But the safe isn't in the shop. It's in the last place they'd look." A loud banging on the shop's door interrupted my reading. Aunt Margaret's voice carried through the glass. "Sophie, open up right now. We know Blake and Amanda saw you finding something." I quickly took a photo of the coordinates and slipped the journal into my bag. Through the window, I could see several of my relatives had gathered, including 2 cousins I hadn't seen in years. News traveled fast. "You have no right to hide anything from the family," Margaret shouted. "That shop belongs to all of us." I walked calmly to the door but didn't open it. "Actually, Aunt Margaret, I have documentation proving attempted breaking and entering by Blake and Amanda last night. Would you like me to call the police again?" She stepped back, flustered. "You wouldn't dare cause a scene." "Try me." I spent the next hour ignoring their threats while carefully studying the coordinates in the safety of the locked shop. They weren't random numbers. They matched the arrangement of certain antiques in the shop. Each piece was positioned at a specific angle, creating a pattern that only became clear when you mapped them out. Finally, I understood. "Oh, Grandma," I whispered. "You brilliant woman. The safe wasn't hidden in the shop at all. It was in the basement of the family's historic church, the one place my money-obsessed relatives never visited anymore. The antiques were arranged to match the coordinates of the church's floor plan." I called Mr. Wong. "The church," I said when he answered. "That's where she hid it, isn't it?" "Pause. Your grandmother said you'd figure it out. Father Chin is expecting you." At the church, my elderly great-uncle, one of the few family members who had never been interested in Grandma's money, was waiting. Without a word, he led me to a hidden room beneath the chapel. "Rose knew they'd tear the shop apart looking," he said, unlocking a heavy door. "So she hid everything here where greed would never think to look for treasure." The safe was behind a panel painted with a rose. The coordinates worked perfectly. Inside was a lifetime of secrets. Stock certificates, property deeds, USB drives, and a letter addressed to the entire family. "It's time," Father Chin said gently. "Call them." 2 hours later, my relatives sat in the church pews, their earlier arrogance replaced by confused silence as Mr. Wong read Grandma's letter. "To my family, you're here because Sophie solved the puzzle that none of you would have had the patience to unravel. You were too busy looking for quick wealth to see the true treasure I built. This shop isn't just a collection of antiques. For 40 years I've been quietly investing in technology companies, real estate and art. Each worthless antique in my shop is actually worth a fortune, properly documented and authenticated. The shop itself sits on land that's worth millions, but its true value is as a historic landmark that can never be developed. I built an empire hiding in plain sight, watching as my own family became too obsessed with money to see the real treasures around them: history, culture, family bonds, and the simple joy of discovering stories in forgotten things. Sophie was the only one who ever understood this. While you mocked her career as a teacher, she was learning the skills needed to preserve both wealth and wisdom. While you saw only dollar signs, she saw the human stories that give objects their true worth. Therefore, here are my final instructions. The shop stays exactly as it is under Sophie's ownership. The properties and investments will be placed in a trust, which Sophie will manage. The antique's true provenance and value will be revealed gradually, through proper channels. But there's a chance for redemption. Any family member who wants to learn the business properly can apprentice at the shop, learning as Sophie did through patience, hard work, and respect for history. After 5 years, they can apply for a position in the trust's management. The choice is yours. Learn to see value in things beyond money, or remain blind to the real treasures hiding in plain sight. Love, Rose. The silence in the church was absolute. Then Amanda started crying. Blake stared at the floor. Aunt Margaret looked like she'd been slapped. The apprenticeship offer is genuine, I said quietly. Grandma believed people could change if given the right motivation. The shop opens tomorrow at 9 if anyone's interested. Over the next year, something extraordinary happened. 3 cousins and 1 aunt actually took up the offer. The shop became a family gathering place again, but different from before. People came to learn, to listen, to understand the stories behind each piece. Aunt Margaret never returned, and Blake tried to challenge the will but failed. But Amanda surprised everyone by becoming my most dedicated apprentice. I never knew Grandma Rose, she told me one day. I only saw what she owned, not who she was. I'd like to change that. The shop thrived. We hired experts to properly document each antique's history and value. Some pieces were worth hundreds of thousands, others millions. But their true worth was in their stories, just as Grandma had taught me. 5 years later, I sat in the old leather chair, watching as Amanda expertly explained the history of a Qing dynasty vase to a customer. The shop had expanded, taking over 2 adjacent buildings, but we kept the original space exactly as Grandma had left it. That morning, I'd found another paper rose on my desk, this one made by Amanda. Inside was a note. Now I understand what Grandma meant. The real treasure isn't in the things we own, but in learning to see their true value. I smiled, thinking of Grandma Rose and her lifetime of secrets. She'd built an empire that looked like a dusty antique shop, raised a fortune while appearing to run a modest business, and in the end she'd found a way to teach her family the difference between price and value. The shop's bell chimed as new customers entered. Amanda greeted them warmly, already launching into the story of how Rose's treasures came to be. Through the window, I could see more tourists gathering, drawn by our growing reputation as one of San Francisco's hidden gems. But they didn't know the best story of all, how a grandmother's clever plan had not only preserved her legacy but had begun to heal her family, teaching them that some treasures are worth more than money, and the greatest inheritance is the wisdom to tell the difference. On my desk next to my computer sits the original paper rose that started it all. It's faded now, but still perfect in its craftsmanship. Like all the best treasures, its true value lies not in what it appears to be, but in the story it tells and the lessons it teaches. Every morning, I touch it gently before opening the shop, remembering Grandma's words. Every rose has its secrets, and the greatest treasures are hidden in plain sight. She was right, of course. The greatest treasure wasn't the fortune she'd built or the antiques she'd collected. It was the lesson she taught us all, that true wealth lies in the patience to look deeper, the wisdom to see beyond surface value, and the understanding that some things are worth far more than their price tag suggests. And that, perhaps, was her most valuable gift of all. The aroma of star anise and caramelized sugar filled the empty dining room of Golden Dragon as I watched the last of our loyal customers walk away. Across the street, the gaudy neon signs of Modern Dynasty blazed against the twilight sky, its tables packed with diners enjoying dishes that had been in my family for 3 generations. My name is Mei Chin, and 6 months ago, my uncle David Chin betrayed our family in a way that went beyond mere business rivalry. He stole the secret recipes that had made Golden Dragon a San Francisco Chinatown landmark for 60 years. Still refusing to close, I see. Uncle David's voice made me turn. He stood in the doorway, immaculate in his designer suit, looking more like a Texio than a restaurant owner. You're only hurting yourself, niece. Your grandmother would want you to be practical. I kept polishing the antique teapot in my hands, the one Papa had brought from Shanghai in 1962 when she first opened Golden Dragon. Funny how you know what grandmother would want, considering you never spent a day learning from her in this kitchen. He shrugged, adjusting his Rolex. The old ways are dead, May. Modern dynasty gives people what they want, our family's authentic recipes with contemporary presentation. You can't compete with innovation. Innovation. That's what he called stealing our recipes and adding fancy plating and premium prices. 6 months ago he'd orchestrated a perfect theft, hired away our head chef with promises of doubled salary, copied our secret recipe book during the chaos of grandmother's funeral, and opened his upscale restaurant just as the tech boom was bringing wealthy new clients to Chinatown. You're right about one thing, I said quietly, setting down the teapot. I can't compete with stolen recipes and lies. But I can expose them. He laughed, the sound echoing through the empty restaurant. Expose what? You have no proof. Chef Lu signed an ironclad NDA. The recipes, they're different enough to be legally distinct. Face it, May, you lost. I watched him leave, his satisfied smirk reflected in the darkened windows. What he didn't know was that I had spent the last 6 months preparing for the perfect moment to reveal the truth. And that moment was coming in exactly 1 week. The San Francisco Culinary Excellence Competition was the most prestigious food event on the West Coast. This year's theme was Heritage and Innovation, celebrating traditional family recipes and modern interpretations. Uncle David had already been bragging about entering Modern Dynasty's innovative take on our grandmother's signature dishes. What he didn't know was that I had also entered Golden Dragon, with a plan that would expose his theft to the entire culinary world. May. A soft voice interrupted my thoughts. Jenny Liu, our former chef's 16-year-old daughter, stood in the kitchen doorway. I finished my homework. Can we start? I smiled, remembering myself at her age learning at my grandmother's side. After Chef Liu left us for Modern Dynasty, Jenny had begged me to teach her the traditional cooking techniques her father had abandoned in favor of modern fusion. Get your apron, I told her, heading to the kitchen. Today we're making your grandmother's red braised pork. Yes, her grandmother, because what Uncle David didn't know was that our head chef's mother had worked alongside my grandmother for 30 years. The recipes he thought he'd stolen were incomplete. The real secrets, the techniques that made our food special, had never been written down. They were passed down through practice, through the kind of patience that modern kitchens had forgotten. As I watched Jenny carefully controlling the flame under the wok, I remembered my own training. Too hot, I said gently, the sugar will burn. Watch the color, like autumn leaves turning golden. She adjusted the heat perfectly, her face showing the same concentration I used to see in her father's eyes, before ambition had drawn him away from tradition. My phone buzzed, a message from Maria Santos, the food critic who'd made Modern Dynasty famous. Got your evidence. It's better than we hoped. Are you sure you want to wait for the competition? The timing has to be perfect, I typed back. For 6 months, I'd been building a network of allies, food critics, former employees, suppliers who'd watched Uncle David's betrayal with disapproval. Each had a piece of evidence, waiting to be revealed at exactly the right moment. Jenny's voice brought me back to the present. The colors changing. I watched as the sauce transformed, becoming the exact shade of amber that had made this dish famous. Now add the star anise, but remember dash. Toast it first, just until fragrant, she finished. I remember Papa showing my father. Before greed and promises of fame had torn our kitchen family apart. The next few days were a blur of preparation. Each morning I opened Golden Dragon despite the empty tables. Each afternoon I trained Jenny in the techniques her father had forgotten. And each night I refined my plan. The competition would feature 3 rounds: traditional technique, modern innovation, and heritage revival. Uncle David had entered Modern Dynasty in all 3, confident that his stolen recipes and fancy plating would impress the judges. But there was one dish he didn't have, my grandmother's most famous creation, the one recipe that had never been written down. She had taught it only to me in the year before she passed, making me promise to share it only with someone who understood that food was about more than profit. Miss Chen. Mr. Wong, Our elderly regular who'd been coming to Golden Dragon for 40 years, peered through the window. "Are you serving today?" I hurried to let him in. "Always for you, Mr. Wong." "The usual." He settled at his regular table, the one by the window where he could watch the street life of Chinatown. "Your uncle's place is busy," he observed, nodding toward Modern Dynasty. "For now," I said, preparing his jasmine tea the traditional way. "Ah, but they don't make it like this," he smiled, inhaling the fragrant steam. "They use tea bags now. Modern efficiency they call it. But efficiency isn't the same as excellence, is it?" I thought about the competition, about Uncle David's belief that innovation meant abandoning tradition rather than building upon it. No, it isn't. That night after closing, I found an envelope slipped under the door. Inside was a USB drive and a note from Chef Lu. "I was wrong. What your uncle's doing, it's not innovation, it's theft. Here's proof of how he got the recipes. Use it well." I plugged the drive into my laptop, watching security footage of Uncle David in our kitchen during grandmother's funeral, hastily photographing our recipe book while everyone was at the service. My hands shook with anger but also satisfaction. Another piece of evidence, ready for the perfect moment. The next morning, a food blogger's review of Modern Dynasty went viral. While the presentation is undeniably modern, these flavors are hauntingly familiar to anyone who remembers the glory days of Golden Dragon. One has to wonder about the authenticity of claims that these are original creations. Uncle David stormed into Golden Dragon an hour later. "What are you doing?" he demanded. "Spreading rumors? Trying to damage my reputation?" I continued preparing for the day, measuring rice with the same careful precision Papa had taught me. "The truth isn't a rumor, Uncle. It has a way of revealing itself. Listen to me very carefully," he said, his voice low and threatening. "If you try anything at the competition, if you say one word about where these recipes came from, I'll bury this place. One health code complaint, one tax audit, that's all it would take." I met his gaze steadily. "Grandmother always said that good food tells its own story. On Tuesday we'll see what story your food tells." After he left, Jenny emerged from the kitchen where she'd been hiding. "He's scared," she said thoughtfully. "I've never seen him scared before." "Fear makes people dangerous," I replied, remembering how my grandmother had handled betrayal in her own time. "But it also makes them careless." The weekend before the competition, I invited all our old regular customers for a special dinner. The dining room was full for the first time in months, filled with people who remembered when Golden Dragon was the heart of Chinatown's culinary scene. "Tomorrow," I announced, "Modern Dynasty will try to claim our heritage as their innovation. But tonight we remember the true meaning of family recipes." I served them dishes exactly as my grandmother had taught me, watching as each bite brought back memories. Mr. Wong cried when he tasted the red braised pork. "Just like the old days," he whispered. What no one knew was that each person in that room would play a part in Tuesday's revelation. Each had a story to tell, a memory to share, a truth to reveal. As I closed up that night, I looked across at Modern Dynasty's gleaming facade. Uncle David had built his success on stolen recipes and broken trust. But he'd forgotten the most important ingredient in any family recipe: the legacy of those who taught us. Tuesday was coming. And with it, a lesson about the true cost of betrayal. The morning of the San Francisco Culinary Excellence Competition dawned with a fog that shrouded Chinatown in mystery. I arrived at the prestigious Ferry Building venue early, watching the other contestants set up their stations. Uncle David was already there, directing his team from Modern Dynasty with theatrical flourishes. "May." Chef Lu approached hesitantly, his Modern Dynasty chef's coat pristine white. "I need to tell you something. Your uncle, he's planning to serve your grandmother's secret 8-treasure duck today. He claims he rediscovered the recipe." My hands stilled on my prep work. 8-treasure duck, Papa's masterpiece that had never been written down, the dish she'd only taught me in her final year. "That's impossible. He's been obsessed with recreating it for months," Chef Lu continued, guilt heavy in his voice. "But something's always missing. He's offering a huge bonus to anyone who can figure it out before the final round." I smiled slightly, remembering Papa's words. "The secret isn't in the ingredients, it's in the intention. Cook with honor and the flavors will reveal themselves." The competition began with the traditional technique round. Each restaurant had to prepare a classic dish that showcased their heritage. I watched as Modern Dynasty presented their version of red braised pork, beautiful plating, perfect garnishes, but something was off in the color. When it was Golden Dragon's turn, I brought out our version, prepared exactly as it had been for 60 years. The judges took their first bites in silence. "This taste," one judge said slowly, "it reminds me of meals I had in Shanghai as a child. How do you achieve this depth?" Before I could answer, Uncle David interrupted. "Our Modern Dynasty version uses the same traditional techniques, but with an innovative twist dash." Actually, Jenny's voice rang out clearly as she stepped forward in her golden dragon apron. "This is my grandmother's technique. The one she taught alongside May's grandmother for 30 years. The one my father used to use before." The judges looked between Jenny and Chef Lu, who couldn't meet his daughter's eyes. The modern innovation round was next. Uncle David presented a deconstructed version of our classic soup dumplings, complete with molecular gastronomy flourishes. The judges praised its creativity, though several noted it lost something of the original soul. For Golden Dragon's entry, I presented a dish that honored tradition while embracing the future, a collaboration between Jenny and me that took proposed techniques and applied them to sustainable local ingredients. The flavors were familiar but fresh, innovative without betraying their roots. "This," the head judge declared, "is how tradition evolves without losing its essence." But it was the final heritage revival round that would change everything. As expected, Uncle David announced he would present his interpretation of the legendary 8-treasure duck. I watched him prepare it, noting every mistake: the temperature too high, the timing rushed, the aromatics added in the wrong order. He was working from a recipe without understanding the philosophy behind it. When it was my turn, I didn't go to my cooking station. Instead, I walked to the center of the judging area. "Before I present my dish," I announced, "I want to tell you a story about family recipes, about legacy, and about truth." The room fell silent. Uncle David's face darkened. "6 months ago, during my grandmother's funeral, these recipes were stolen." I nodded to Maria Santos, who began displaying photographs on the event's main screen, the security footage, copies of the original recipe book, testimonials from suppliers and former staff. But what the thief didn't understand was that the true recipes were never just about ingredients and instructions. They were about honor, tradition, and the wisdom passed down through generations. Chef Lu stepped forward, removing his Modern Dynasty coat. "Everything she's saying is true. I helped steal these recipes, betrayed the family that had taught me everything. But the most important lessons, the real secrets, those can't be stolen. They have to be earned." Jenny joined me at the cooking station, and together we began preparing Papo's 8-treasure duck. As we cooked, I told the story of each technique, each ingredient, each secret that had been passed down. The judges watched, mesmerized, as the dish came together in a way that was both familiar and revelatory. "The real innovation," I explained, "isn't in changing everything to seem new. It's in understanding your foundations so deeply that you can build upon them with respect and wisdom." When we presented the finished dish, the difference was undeniable. Where Uncle David's version was a shallow imitation, ours told the story of 3 generations of Chinese culinary artistry. The judges' decision was unanimous. Golden Dragon won not just the competition, but special recognition for preserving and advancing cultural culinary heritage. But the victory wasn't just about winning a competition. As I stood accepting the award, I saw the change rippling through the audience. Restaurant owners who'd been considering hiring Uncle David's staff backed away. Food critics who'd praised Modern Dynasty's innovations began revising their reviews. "This isn't over," Uncle David hissed as he pushed past me toward the exit. "The customers don't care about tradition. They want modern, exciting dash." "Actually," Maria Santos interrupted, her food critics badge prominent, "they care about authenticity. And tomorrow's headlines will tell them exactly where to find it." The next few weeks transformed Chinatown's culinary landscape. Modern Dynasty's customers dwindled as the truth spread. Chef Lu returned to Golden Dragon, not as head chef but as a student, relearning the traditions he'd forgotten. Jenny continued her training, bridging the gap between old and new. We renovated Golden Dragon, but thoughtfully, preserving its soul while updating its comfort. The lines started forming again, not just for the food but for the stories behind each dish. One evening, as the dining room hummed with happy customers, I found Jenny staring at a photograph of our grandmothers together in the old kitchen. "Do you think they knew," she asked, "that we'd be here carrying on their legacy?" I touched Popo's old teapot, now displayed proudly in a place of honor. They knew that true recipes are about more than food. They're about family, honor, and the courage to protect what matters. A year later, Golden Dragon was named one of San Francisco's essential restaurants, praised for preserving traditional techniques while thoughtfully embracing change. Uncle David sold Modern Dynasty to a hotel chain and left the city, but his departure barely made news. The real story was about revival, how a new generation was learning to value its heritage while building its future. Jenny enrolled in culinary school while continuing her apprenticeship with us. Chef Lou found his passion for teaching again, running classes for young cooks eager to learn traditional techniques. As for me, I finally understood what Papa meant when she said that recipes are like family stories. They only survive when they're passed down with love and respect. Every morning before we open, Jenny and I make tea in Popo's old pot, honoring the past while planning for the future. Last week, a young chef from another family restaurant asked me how we maintain our traditions in a changing world. I showed her the wall where we now display photos of every cook who's trained in our kitchen, alongside the original picture of our grandmothers. The secret, I told her, isn't in protecting the recipes. It's in protecting their meaning. Innovation without respect is just imitation, but tradition without growth is just history. The real art is in finding the balance. She nodded, understanding. Then she asked the question I'd been waiting for, "Will you teach me?" And just like that, another story began, another branch of the family tree extended. Because in the end, that's what Papa had really been protecting, not just recipes, but the wisdom to know that our greatest legacy isn't in the dishes we create, but in the knowledge we choose to share and the people we choose to share it with. Every evening, as the sunset turns Chinatown's streets golden, I can almost hear Popo's voice in the rhythm of our kitchen, in the sizzle of the wok and the chorus of "Yes, Chef," from our trainees. The recipes are safe now not because they're secret but because they're being passed down the way they were meant to be, with honor, with wisdom, and with love. And that, even more than winning or revenge, is the sweetest victory of all.